I couldn't see what that was. "My lord," one of the vampires immediately exclaimed, saluting formally when he spotted Alexander. My mate didn't reply, however, but went to one knee beside the shape on the floor. "He's dead, my lord," the vampire mumbled. Still, Alexander reached out his hand and touched the shape, which I could now tell was a body. Beside me, light flared to life to illuminate it, and the sight made my stomach roil in shock. There was blood everywhere, and one limb had been torn off, but it was so badly disfigured that I couldn't tell if it was an arm or a leg. The smell alone, compared with the sight, made me turn around and stumble to my knees, my meal of before forcing its way up. As I puked my guts out in the most ungracious way on the grass, I heard a voice behind me snicker as if they found it amusing. The sound was cut off by an angry bark from Alexander. A second later, I felt cool hands on the back of my neck, holding my hair away from my face. There, I told you it was better if you stayed inside," Alexander whispered in my ear, tugging me into the safety of his arms to hold me against his hard chest. "That's one of Thornton's men for sure, I recognize him." "Seems like Deidre was right after all," Alexander said, meant for the rest of the group to hear. "Who did they take?" "Mattis." There was a silence after that one spoken name, and I instinctively knew everyone thought the poor guy was dead too. Judging by the marks on the ground and the fence and the injuries each of the other bore, there had been a hefty struggle. "Get 3 more units to sweep the perimeter and keep the same number active at all times. I want no one to venture out alone. Do not engage unless you're sure you can take them out. We'll take no captives." The way Alexander spoke made it clear he'd dealt with situations like this before and knew how to handle them. Feeling like I had to make up for losing my dinner after insisting I come, I straightened and pushed Alexander away from me. There had to be something I could do, right? I wasn't a detective or anything but. My eyes fell on the disfigured body again. It appeared to be male by the size of it and was lying face down. There were gashes running over it that looked like he'd been mauled by a huge animal, and it was clear that was Jaden's handiwork. I felt a slight tugging on my mind, and then before I could stop myself, I'd taken the few steps to reach the body and touched my hand to the head. The skull had been bashed in, and as such, most of the brains had been destroyed, a sure way to kill a vampire. I heard a collective gasp behind me from the others, and Alexander exclaiming my name in warning. As I touched the head, a warmth spread through me, and then I saw images flash before my eyes. They appeared to be memories, but they were definitely not mine. It was so fast that I couldn't make out what they were. After a short moment, they slowed down until I could see one image clearly. With long, elegant white blonde hair, straight as a ruler, and held together with an old-fashioned black ribbon, Thornton, as always, looked like a lord stepped out of the 17th century. That era had certainly suited the asshole. He wore a tailor-made suit that came right out of a fashion magazine and made him look like a CEO or something like that. He had the same aura anyway, cold and cunning. I really didn't know why I still worked for the old shark. He was as vicious and mean as any vampire his age. Pity he looked no older than 30. As I stepped up closer to him, I bowed my head respectfully. Oh, how it grated to have to do that. It should be me on that throne of his, ruling this territory. Thornton wasn't all that powerful. If only I could get enough support among his followers, I could overthrow him. Then I could do anything I wanted. No one could tell me what to do, and I could have all my desires fulfilled. Give me the girl. They took Deidre and hid her, but it's no matter. I want that so-called mate of Alexander. She's human. It can't be hard. Get her. I want her to be mine. Thornton's voice cut across the room like a whip. I cringed involuntarily, and then told myself again. Soon, I wouldn't have to cringe from the likes of him. Soon, they would be the ones groveling. Get the girl. You can count on me, I told Thornton, coating my voice in sugar. Don't harm her unless it's absolutely necessary. I want to take care of her personally. It'll be a lesson for Alexander to see his mate degraded. The disgusting man rubbed his hands together in anticipation at the thought alone, and then nodded. Go. I almost ran from the room. With a gasp, I stumbled backwards, only to be caught in Alexander's arms. They were coming for me. Thornton wants me alive so he can. I shivered as I remembered the depth of deprivation of the mind I just touched. Remembered the associations he'd linked with Thornton's words. Torture, rape. It was all in a day's work for this guy. even though he'd labeled Thornton as disgusting. It was only because he wasn't getting his own sick desires fulfilled. I straightened my back and stood up, shrugging out of Alexander's grasp to stand on my own. He was a child molester. I spat out, no longer feeling sick or queasy about the brutal death this man had suffered. You should have ripped off all his limbs before you smashed his head, Jaden. A gasp, and then the panther said, "If I'd known that I would have, trust me." But the bastard was weak. He nearly died from the shock when I ripped off his arm. "I didn't know you were such a violent person, Brittany. Stabbing Lysander, stabbing me, ripping this guy to pieces." Laughter all around, and then Alexander tugged me back into his arms. "She's not a violent person at all. But as you can all see, she knows when violence unfortunately is needed. So when were you going to tell me you can read memories from practically unsalvageable brains?" Jaden added. I was being guided back towards the house with sure hands and firm steps. Obviously, Alexander had decided there was nothing else we could do there. I didn't know I could, Jay. I don't often get in contact with dead brains, you know. I shivered as I realized what I'd done. I felt disgusting after having touched the memories of that mind. Plus, my legs really felt like they were about to give now. I was so tired. It's quite something, Britt. It's why I touched the corpse in the first place. Because I have some small talent in it, but not even Sarah could have gotten anything from that. Had the head just been severed, it would have been a piece of cake. But this, a proud pat on my shoulder from my mate, and then he suddenly swung me up in his arms. "You do realize that with Thornton's plans confirmed, I suddenly did gain the right to lock you in my room to keep you safe?" Teasing words spoken with a grim look in his eyes that told me he was only half joking. "You are not locking me in anywhere. I'll develop teleportation skills and teleport myself out or something if you do," I exclaimed angrily. But after those words, I felt drained and a sliver of fear shot up my spine. "Alexander, will this always stay like this? Or will the threat of Thornton eventually go away?" "I don't want to have to fear for my life all the time. I'll kill him if he comes near you," was Alexander's simple answer to that. A second later, we stepped into the kitchen, where Jaden excused himself to look over more security details, muttering angrily about Lysander having been moved away again, so he had to manage things on his own. Something about Lysander being good at doing the stupid job. Back inside the house, I made a beeline for the shower again. I just had to cleanse myself after that horrendous experience. Alexander watched me go, but didn't comment on it. As I shrugged out of the beautiful dress, I noticed that the hem was stained with crimson droplets, like Deidre's tears. A pity, but I didn't think I'd ever want to wear it again anyway. Not now that it had been soiled with tonight's nightmares. After my shower, I still didn't feel the same, but I went to check on Andy anyhow. I felt the need to assure myself that he was fine. Surprisingly, I found Alexander in Andy's bedroom standing at the foot of the castle-like bed with his arms folded across his chest. There was a frown creasing his forehead as if he was lost deep in thought. Bad thoughts. He simply lifted one arm and tugged me under it so he could hold me against his chest tightly. The gesture was absent-minded and showed me how he felt the need for physical reassurance just like I did. Andy was fast asleep in the bed, his arms thrown up across the pillow the way babies and young children often sleep. He was a little old to sleep that way, but he was so mature with his observations, usually, that I didn't care. He was softly snoring and his expression was peaceful. It was much easier to forget the disgusting memories I'd seen now. "You needed to check on him too?" Alexander whispered. I nodded as I focused on the slowly rising and falling of my brother's chest. The man killed was one of Thornton's generals. Karsten, Jules Karsten, can you confirm that? Or was it impossible to get his name from the memories you took? I closed my eyes. It was him, I'm sure. I had the image of that man clear in my mind's eye, the way he remembered himself in the mirror. He was young and handsome, charismatic with a smooth voice that he used to charm everyone. I shivered when I remembered how he charmed little kids to come with him. For once, the violent image of the man's death actually made me feel better. I will make today's nightmares go away," Alexander whispered as he spoke, his lips brushed against my earshell. I shivered again, but it was in a good way this time. I loved this man with all my heart, and I loved how he had put aside his anger for now so he could reassure me. So he could make me feel better, even though it was my own stubbornness that had caused me nightmares tonight. He'd wanted to protect me from this. Although he had not gone about it the right way, I understood his actions better. It was the words, You do not want to see this, that I remembered now. I allowed him to lead me away from Andy's room, although he paused at the door a moment with a focused look. My skin prickled. Back in our bedroom, he undressed me with a flick of his hand, the clothes simply melting from my body. His own followed the same way but were replaced so quickly with sweatpants that I couldn't even catch a glimpse. You will not touch me tonight, a gramo groi. It was a command, a darkly spoken one in a husky voice that promised all kinds of heaven and hell, sweet torture. He was in a dark mood still, this mate of mine. It would be dangerous to make him lose control tonight. I obeyed as he told me to lie down. He made good on his promise and took all the nightmares away, loving my body so tenderly that I was lost in oblivion. I didn't know he could be so sweet and loving, so painfully tender. Especially with the mood he'd been in, it was amazing. There is a problem was exactly eyeing my dealing in Kate and his sensual temptations. The missing guard had been found. Or, well, parts of him at least. Alexander received the news from Jaden with a stony face, then cast me one look. It clearly said, "Do you wish to see?" Surprised by that, I asked, "You're not going to force me to stay inside?" He shook his head. "I wish to keep the brutality of my world at least away from you. Last night you forced your way in anyway. It's up to you now. Do you wish to see all of its horrible cruelty and violence? Or was last night enough to shock you into accepting the protection that I offer?" I thought about that shortly. He seemed sad about it, as if he not only wanted to shelter me, but keep the violence from tainting me, my innocence. I knew that he'd once said I was a gentle soul. He wanted to preserve that. I wasn't so sure. I had stabbed a total of 3 people the past few days. I was half demon, and I'd wished bad things on my stepmom and so-called father plenty of times. His need to protect my innocence collided with his order that I carry around a belt of knives, of course. No matter that the knives were very small and they were meant for defense when flight wasn't an option. Yes, I will come to see. I will not live in ignorance and let you carry this burden alone. Not seeing the violence will not take it away or make it better. I don't think it will change me for the worse, I spoke, my voice clear and steady. A sudden revelation came to me. My father might be a demon and my grandfather an archangel, but my heart at least is human. That will never change. Alexander's face finally showed an expression. A gentle smile played around his lips, and pride glowed in his stormy eyes. Together, a guamukwa, he told me, and I knew he meant that there would be nothing between us from now on. Walk this world together, 2 halves of a whole. Together, Alexander, I whispered back as he dipped his head and softly brushed his lips over mine. Something clicked into place in that moment, and I knew our bond had changed, progressed. He had accepted me as his equal now, not the girl he had to look after. When I pulled back from him, I realized Jaden was still standing right next to us, following the entire exchange avidly. More than that, Andy had walked into the room, and by the look on his face, he'd heard what I'd said too. "You know Daddy is a demon amethyst?" he asked, his eyes bright as if he'd received a Christmas present or something. I nodded slowly. Yes, I remembered Andy. He said it was a secret. He said I was the only one. Andy continued hurrying over so that he could wrap his arms tightly around me. "I'm glad you know." His eyes darted quickly to Alexander for a short moment, a look shared between them. I hugged him back, nodding. "Of course, Giant. Now I need to go with Alexander to check on something. Will you be good and do your lessons with Sarah? Or is Deidre teaching you today?" "D-Day is," he nodded, already letting go and hurrying off. He was very attached to the red-headed, cool-eyed woman, and I realized that I really liked her too. Now that I knew so much more about her, it was hard not to like her. She was an entirely different person when she let her guard down. "Brittany?" He stopped at the kitchen door to look over his shoulder at me. "Can we talk and cuddle in bed later? Just us like we always used to?" I smiled at his innocent look and request. "Of course, Giant. I'll look forward to it." When he disappeared from the room, I nodded and squared my shoulders. "Okay, let's see what today brought us." I nodded at Jaden to lead the way. There was a speculative look in the panther's eyes as he looked at me. But when Alexander took my hand and pulled me with him to the door, he squared his shoulders. When we passed him, he ran his knuckles over my cheek. "I see you, Brittany." After that, he led the way through the mansion and out the front door. I didn't know what that meant, but it seemed Jaden had found some new kind of respect for me. impressed maybe with the way I'd dealt with Alexander last night, and then with the way I'd spoken about my revelation just now. Outside, it became quickly apparent what we'd come to see. There was a few men, either vampires, witches, or shifters, and they were walking around as if processing a crime scene. All that was missing was uniformed police officers and the yellow tape. In the middle of the front lawn, something small and lumpy was covered by a white sheet, dark red coming through it in big, ugly stains. I didn't really want to know what it was. Underneath the sheet, it was too small to be a body or even an arm, and it terrified me to think that it was just a head. Alexander looked around critically while flaring his nose, obviously using his powerful sense of smell to track for strangers. I wondered how effective that would be with the swarm of people around. He must have read my mind because he said, "I smell no unfamiliar scents. You reckon Thornton had an angel do the delivery?" Jaden replied. I made the same conclusion. I was second on the scene and smelled only Mattis and Gareth, who found him when he swept the lawn on his round. I wasn't sure if the panther had a better sense of smell than Alexander or not, but Alexander seemed satisfied with the answer. Anything else found besides that? Alexander nodded towards the sheet-covered lump. No, but I think you better take a look at it. Jaden said the dreaded words, and I swallowed a few times, hoping that this time I would be able to hold down my food. I didn't think it would be any better, but one could hope, of course. Alexander nodded and pulled me into the circle of his arms protectively, his lips brushing my ear as he spoke softly. You can still turn back a grand macroy. No one will blame you if you turn back so soon after last night. I can tell you all you need to know when I've seen it myself. I shook my head. No together. A warm breath filtered across my cheek. Yes. I expected him to let go of me, but instead he lifted me around the waist so that my back was pressed against his front and my feet dangled at least a foot above the ground. In a flash, he was beside the sheet-covered lump. It lifted off by unseen hands to reveal a bloody mass I couldn't even recognize. My stomach heaved instantly at the sight. Alexander was in my mind at the same moment and filled it with the scent of the rain and the storm. Surprisingly, my body felt calmer right away, and my stomach stopped roiling. Thank you, Alexander. Now that I looked closer, I realized it was in fact a head, but it was so crushed and disfigured that it was hard to make out. You couldn't even tell what it had originally looked like, except that the person had once had long dark hair, now matted and dark with blood and pulp that I didn't want to identify. Alexander was sniffing the air as if trying to ascertain that it was in fact Mattis, the missing guard. You are sure this is him, Jaden? Instantly, I knew what I had to do, and the thought made my stomach queasy even with Alexander's reassurance. Put me down. I will check, I said, my voice containing a slight quiver now that I really hated. There was 10 other people out here all watching us, and more importantly me, with curiosity. I didn't want to disappoint anyone, and especially Alexander any further by puking again. Britt, there's no need. By the scent alone, it's most likely him. This is a warning from Thornton to tell us he's not afraid, that he's able to enter the sanctity of my home without detection, he said as he stepped back away from the head. He placed me back on my own feet when we were a few feet back and spun me around to press my face against his chest, hiding me from view from his men. He spoke in my mind. I'm so sorry that you've been pulled into the Thornton conflict. For this alone, I wish I could still hate Deidre. What did she even do to warrant Thornton's fury? I knew the answer to that, so I replied, she saved a child. That's what she did, Alexander. Thornton wanted to kill the child as punishment for one of his mistresses, his very own offspring. Fran Nafola, I should have killed the bastard when I had the chance. He cursed out loud. At his words, pretty much everyone around us looked up in surprise. Yeah, I was wondering why the hell you never did that, Alex, Jaden replied sardonically. You might have missed it, but there's something embedded in the skull, and it appears to be Talanic Stick's mark. Ifrayan Nafola, Alexander spat out again, forgetting for a moment that he held me as he jumped back to take a look at the area Jaden pointed at. I had only once before heard him utter curse words in Gaelic like this, and that had been when he thought someone might have hurt Andy. I shrugged out of his arms and crouched down next to the head so I could look more closely myself. That was my grandfather's mark they were talking about. It helped if I pretended it wasn't a head I was looking at, but something entirely different that just happened to look that way. Detach myself from my emotions and cling to the storm that was Alexander inside my head and right next to my body. It wasn't clear to me what the mark looked like, but on the bloody ruin of the man's cheek, something was engraved. Flowing serpent-like lines around a small circle with an upside-down triangle in the middle. There was more around it, but that was lost with the damage done to the head when it was dropped to the lawn. Brittany, this changes things. Do you think you can handle it? I can stay in your mind to steady you. He touched me with a large hand on the small of my back as he crouched down beside me. This is my grandfather's mark? You are sure? I asked out loud to no one in particular. It was satisfying to hear some of the men gasp in surprise. There's no doubt, Britt, Alexander confirmed. He wanted me to meet his eyes, so he could better see how I was dealing with this. But I kept them focused solely on that small detail. The mark was burned into the skin with a hot poker of sorts. It was clearly done when the man was alive, judging by the swelling around it. Yet the skin was surprisingly whole right next to it. It was there that I carefully touched the head with the tip of my pointer finger. I did not want to touch him anywhere else, certainly not the bloody or pulpy parts. Instantly, I felt a burning in my head as my somewhat dormant powers roared to life inside me. I had a better grasp of what was happening now, and Alexander's presence in my mind truly did steady me. The head was completely crushed in the back, even more caved in than the one I'd touched last night. In a fraction of a second, it felt as if power streamed through me, through my finger and out across the head, reassembling the astral version of it. It was from there that I could take out the now restored memories and access them as if I was reading a live person's mind. Alexander's presence did more than steady me, I realized then. Instead of being assaulted by memories I didn't pick or searched for, I felt mentally suspended within them as I whirled around to look for the one that I needed. The man's name. It came to me as soon as I thought of it, Chamali. It was an Aztec name I knew immediately, and it was clear as day he'd been an agent for Tlenextic. But what had he been doing here? Why had he been dropped on Alexander's lawn? The answer came to me from the man's memories. He'd been my guard of sorts, keeping a watchful eye out to ensure I was safe and as well as could be for now. There was plenty of memories that resurfaced from my investigation that showed me as I grew up. He'd been watching over me for 13 years. As I pried, the memory came to me that showed the moment he was assigned to be my guard. I stepped into the office confidently and with my chin held up high. It was an honor to be here, to be assigned a job by the hand of Tlenextic himself. Of course, Tlenextic would never busy himself with simple things like running the territory. He was as close to a god as creatures in this world could get. He would not wish to taint himself with my lowly presence. But the hand himself. All my hard work and skills had finally paid off if I'd been brought to the notice of the hand for an assignment. I would do my absolute best and make them proud of me. As I stepped into the office, the hand looked up from behind the desk and fixed me with his coal black eyes. They seemed to go right through me and I stood even straighter, allowing him to see the blaze of my loyalty. With a twitch of his lips, the hand nodded, "Chamali, have a seat." The office was Spartan, with only a large desk and an high-backed chair behind it where the hand sat. The windows gave a view down over the slopes of the Andes, or at least a tiny portion of it. The only other furniture in the room was a chair similar to the one the hand sat on right in front of the desk. It looked anything but comfortable, yet I sat down on it with as much grace as possible. I would not stumble nor complain in front of the hand. The hand Domi Alexed the room with his large wings spread out behind him for display. Charcoal black like his eyes and hair, but streaked beautifully with fiery red and gold, much like a sunset against the black satin of night. There is a task our Lord wishes you and you alone to fulfill. Do you think you are ready to accept such a responsibility? I took a deep breath before speaking, feeling no nerves as I said, "I am ready." The hand nodded. "Yes, I think you are. You have done well, very well in your service these past few centuries." A pause, as the hand rose from his seat to his full height. He was a tall man and impressive as he stood. There was lean muscles and tawny golden skin everywhere except when hidden by the ancient warrior's tunic he wore. "There's a young girl that the Lord wishes protected. You will go to America to do so. You will be her shadow, but she is not to know you are there, and you will only interfere if her life is in danger. Keep any creature of our world away from her." That was the most unusual request I had ever heard, but I immediately stood up and saluted. "Yes, sir, I will be her shield like my name proclaims." I felt dizzy when I pulled myself out of the memory, but I knew I had one more question I needed answered. Why had Thornton taken my guard? I didn't have to submerge myself deep in the memories this time. I could stay on the fringe and peek inside the memory that presented itself at my question. Chimali had been guarding me from a distance, keeping a watchful eye and cursing, when he realized I'd inadvertently ended up in a school that swarmed with supernatural creatures. Then he'd been shocked to realize I'd actually stumbled into Alexander's arms, and he'd been without power to prevent it. He'd reported as soon as he'd seen it, but the orders came that it would be safer to keep me in Alexander's presence. Who better to keep me safe than my soulmate? He'd been taken the day Deidre had first shown up at our doorstep. She'd not seen him, nor had she seen the vampire that had followed her. But he'd made a mistake by taking human form, and the vampire had sensed him using magic. Interested because he was one of Talanixtic's men, and because of that Deidre had gotten away unharmed, I pulled completely out of poor Chimali's mind. After that, I did not want to see the gruesome details of his death and torture after his capture. All I knew was that he'd endured it with dignity and pride, and that he had not surrendered any information. As I stiffly climbed to my feet, tears started pouring from my eyes unbidden. This man had died for me, yet he'd never once carried me ill thoughts. He'd loved me like a brother and a father, wept for me when my mother died, and ached for me every other time I was hurt and he was unable to do anything for me. Alexander didn't say a word, having seen everything I saw in Chimali's memories. Rather, he simply gathered me tightly in his arms and held me close. It's not Mattis. Get more men to sweep out and search for the trail. I want him found. He might still be alive. He lifted me off my feet and started walking back into the house with me. My lord? Whose head is on your lawn then? Jaden asked as he caught up with us after having barked out orders to the remaining men gathered on the scene. I wanted to reply. Chimali deserved the honor of being known as a hero, but Alexander beat me to it. He was a hero, Jay. Chimali was his name, and he was Talanixtic's chosen guardian for Brittany. I am sure that without him she would not have been alive today. We will honor him with the death rites as chosen by his people. Jaden said nothing but nodded, his face grim. I spent all afternoon with Andy sprawled out across the bed in my bedroom, watching Disney movies and goofing around with him the way we sometimes did. It was nice to get a break from all the bad things of the past few days and relax. But that all ended when Andy turned his eyes on me with a very serious look on his face. He'd been a little more quiet at the end of the last movie we'd watched, and now I could see that there was something he wanted to talk about. I smiled encouragingly, wanting to show him that I was there for him and would not judge him for anything he had to say. Brittany, our father, he came to me every night before. Before Alexander? He said with a small voice that sounded more mature somehow than when he usually talked. I nodded. Yes. Why didn't you tell me, Giant? You could have stayed in my room every night had I known. Did he threaten you if you told someone? He nodded. Yes. It was our little secret, he said. He always wanted me to do things. Things I didn't want, but he was stronger than just the boogeyman that you always scared away from me. I remembered the boogeyman Andy always used to worry about when we were younger, especially the one incident where I'd found that feather from Talanixtic. Had our actual father been in the room at that time? Had I nearly had a brush with the demon? Why didn't our grandfather protect Andy when he did protect me? It didn't make sense to me. Our daddy, he said I was special and that I'd make him proud one day. He said I was really talented, Brittany. He said I could do something no demon had been able to for hundreds of years. And he always made me practice. I hated practice with him. He made me hurt people. I tried to stifle my gasp, but he still heard. I didn't want to hurt anyone. May, you know that, right? It hurts me to hurt people. I always feel everyone's hurt. Oh, Andy. I tugged him into an embrace tightly. Poor boy. No wonder he was always so desperate to ease people's minds and pains. If he really felt them himself as if they were his own, how could he live with it? No wonder he didn't like interacting much with other people. You are not upset with me? Andy asked me timidly after a while. Course not. I know you'd never hurt someone on purpose just for fun. You're a good kid and my baby brother. I love you no matter what. I'll make sure that demon can never again come near you, all right? I know Britt. He won't come here with Alexander around. I think he's frightened of him, Andy said, sounding happy all of a sudden. He showed up at school right after we moved in, and I could tell. He said he was going away because he didn't want Alexander to find him. Well, that's great, isn't it? We're not ever leaving, Alexander, so you don't have to worry about it any longer. I ran my hand through Andy's thick curls, but he sighed sadly and shook his head. It's not that easy, Amia. I'll go now. Someone is anxious for your attention. He pulled out of my arms, jumped up from the big bed, and ran for the door. With a wave and a smile on his face, he pulled it open right in time to reveal Alexander on the other side, his hand raised as if he was about to knock. Your timing is impeccable, Andy, he said as he ruffled my brother's hair. Oh, I knew you were there. Bye. He darted out the door and ran down the hall yelling for Deidre. He wanted her to take him to the practice hall on the other side of the house. Alexander chuckled as he stepped inside our bedroom and closed the door behind him. Kids, how did he know I was there? I shrugged, not entirely sure myself. Might be that he felt your, emotional signature or something? He told me he can feel what others feel as his own. Or, he said he felt pain that way. Alexander sat down beside me on the bed, kicking off his boots and unbuttoning the top few buttons on his shirt. He was frowning thoughtfully as he said, Could be. Maybe Bob can teach him some things then. Shields especially. His talents are similar, I think. Bob can sense moods overall. He usually knows what you're feeling. A laugh. Very annoying combined with a sister that pretty much always knows what you're thinking. Well, I don't know what you were thinking most of the time, so you'll have to enlighten me. I still don't know what else made you so mad yesterday, for example. Alexander turned around to look at me, fixing me with his stormy gray eyes. I did try to tell you before we were interrupted by Jaden, and I was going to this morning when he yet again interrupted us. He breathed out heavily as if mentally preparing himself, but instead of talking, he crawled onto the bed completely and crowded above me, so I was completely surrounded by mail. His legs on either side of me and his chest pressing me back into the pillows. His face so close to mine that I could feel his breath filter across my cheeks. I do not wish to put even more stories of violence on you. Aguro mohua. He kissed me softly for a short moment, and I felt my senses go haywire. My body responded eagerly to his nearness and the gentle caress. Together, Alexander. Remember? I whispered. I meant to sound fierce, but the words came out rather huskily. Together, Brittany, Alexander replied with a nod. But this is violence on my part, and I do not wish for your opinion of me to change. I understood his hesitance to share immediately. He was afraid I would be scared or horrified by what he had done that day. He was not proud of himself for whatever had happened. Was it necessary? I asked him softly, wrapping my arms around his neck at the same time and curling my fingers in his thick, silky hair. He nodded slowly. Yes, it was necessary. But that doesn't justify any kind of violence now, does it? My father always used to say that violence was never the way. If you had to resort to it, it meant you were doing something wrong. The only solution was through peaceful actions. Then, how did you get to be on top? How did you manage to conquer a territory of your own? I don't imagine you did that through peaceful actions. Did you? Where did this suddenly come from? Alexander shook his head again and leaned down further to press his face in the crook of my neck, hiding his expression from my view. Of course not. It was blood and ashes and violence all the way. No supernatural creature abides to the human laws. We have our own. And if we don't rule with an iron fist, we'd have mass anarchy everywhere. I nodded as I stroked one hand down his back, marveling at the fact that he was for once showing weakness. Sharing with me his worries and his regret. He hated having to do violence because he was at heart a gentle soul like me. Then it's okay, Alexander. You might do violence, but it's through it that you save lives. Why the sudden conscience about it? I don't think you've thought about your father's words for a long time. Otherwise, you'd have never chosen to carve out your own territory. Alexander pulled back so he could look at me, sudden amusement twinkling in the depths of his eyes. Because of you, Agramochoyi, you made me remember with your speech about human hearts. But the melancholic mood seemed to have passed now because he suddenly sat up, straddling me with his long legs and brushed his hands through my hair. You are beautiful. I felt a blush rise on my cheeks, but I shook my head. No, you don't change the subject. You still haven't told me anything. He laughed. There's no fooling you, is there? Very well. With his hands, he started undoing the belt of knives around my waist. I had been a good girl and carried it all day, with all the things I'd seen today. And last night, I too felt a lot safer having it nearby. I visited several Saisak yesterday. I told you that, yes? He asked as the belt came undone, and he deposited it on the nightstand. Yes, you did. They leave parts of your territory in your stead, right? I asked, watching closely what he did next, unbuttoning his own shirt completely. With every button, a new patch of smooth skin and rippling muscle was revealed. Very good. I have to keep a close watch to keep them in line. To keep them from wanting more than is their due. The 7 I visited needed checking. I had reports that I needed to verify myself. Were they true? I wondered as I licked my lips to make them moist. My mouth was a little dry now at the sight of him. I could feel his erection pressed against me, where he straddled me, and anticipation of what he was going to do next had my blood humming. Some were, and I had to punish them. I will show you the reports later, agreed. He asked me, finish with his own shirt. He started on mine. With his nimble fingers, he made short work of the buttons. I knew he could make our clothes vanish in an instant now, but he seemed to derive pleasure from undressing me. I would like that. Alexander, why did you decide to have your own territory if you dislike violence? Another short laugh, the sound a little more hoarse now as his own desire flared. I just woke up one day and decided I would. I was sick of running and fighting for my life and the lives of Bob and Sarah. I thought, what better way to keep them safe? The biggest, meanest, strongest creatures out there hunted me and mine. Why not become the biggest, meanest, and strongest creature? I could see the logic in that. Did it work? I wondered, my voice a little husky now that he was running his talented fingers over the bare skin of my abdomen. In a way, he murmured against my stomach, brushing his lips across the skin. Goosebumps broke out all over as my body remembered only too well what he'd done with those lips of his. In a way? I asked. I tried hard to focus on the conversation, but it wasn't that easy. My gorgeous mate was trying his best to keep me distracted, it seemed. Or maybe he was busy distracting himself. Hush, he told me in a whisper as he skimmed his mouth slowly up my body, pausing at the valley between my breasts to press a soft, open-mouthed kiss just above the edge of my bra there. With his tongue, he ran a line along the edge of the satin, right along the slope of my breast. First left and then back to repeat the action along the right one. I moaned at the sensation as fire sizzled through my body to awake a slow burning low in my body. I love your skin. So soft, Alexander murmured, rubbing his face in an almost feline action against my chest. The roughness of his cheeks eliciting another moan from me. The abrasive texture felt like heaven against my skin. Combing my fingers through his hair, I arched into his caress, gasping when he took advantage of that by slipping his hands behind my back. My bra fell away from me seconds later. He held it up for a moment with a mischievous look in his eyes. Red looks good on you, agramo kroi. Unspoken did he leave the words, but I like you better naked. It was obvious in the way he let his eyes roam over my bared chest, however. Deciding to take action myself, I ran my hands down his shoulders to slip the unbuttoned shirt off him. Delighting in the way goosebumps broke out all over his chest as I ran my nails up his back, feeling the muscle bunch and ripple beneath my fingertips as he moved. Alexander's hands made their way to the waistline of my pants, the button already undone before I registered what he was doing. I want you naked and moaning my name, gramo kroi, a whisper against the skin just below my belly button. He accompanied the whisper with an image of me doing just that pushed into my mind. In it, I was writhing on the bed in pleasure as he drove me to my peak with his fingers, his mouth working magic on that favorite part of my neck, right where my shoulder began, but just above my clavicle. Mark me. The words came out a breathy whisper as I pulled on his hair to get him to look at me. He groaned in response, his eyes completely black as he met mine. Britt, he said, sounding in control of himself despite his desire. Do you know what you're asking? Nodding, I sat up straight, brushing my bare breasts against his chest and laughing softly when that made him shiver. One large hand coming around to press against the small of my back, crushing me more tightly to him. The other he used to tilt my head upward so he could look me in the eye. In this position, his arousal was hot and hard, pressed low against my abdomen. You are sure? He asked as he searched my face for any signs of doubt. His eyes were bleeding black slowly into the white now. I was absolutely sure. I had never been more sure in my life. Why wait with the inevitable when I knew we would both enjoy it? There would be no regrets because he loved me with all that was him, and he always would. Bob and Deidre were proof that nothing could ever temper that love. So much had happened between them, and they weren't exactly together right now, but still, they loved each other. Still, they would protect each other with all that they had. I sent him this knowledge, the certainty I felt, through our mental connection, because I knew nothing less would suffice to convince him. The moment I did, I saw the last of his eyes go black, the sight eerie but also beautiful. I was reflected back in those dark pools so clearly that they almost appeared mirrors. The last of our clothes melted away from our bodies. I gasped at the feel of him aroused against my bare skin, the velvety softness covering that thick length of steel. I actually moaned just from the feel of him. He moved then, pressing me down into the pillows with one hand and sliding down and off me himself. "You will let me lead Brittany," he said. He sounded stern, and I knew that if I didn't agree to this demand, he would still back away. Today was not for games and teasing, for making him lose his grip on himself. I had eternity with him to do just that, so tonight he would be in control. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that he would guide me, us, through this safely. I wasn't even afraid that it would hurt, despite his size. I allowed the trust to be visible on my face, let the knowledge bleed into my eyes as I locked gazes with him. He nodded and slid his hands down my body in a gentle caress, rubbing his fingers across my abdomen and then down teasingly across my hips. What happened next was unlike anything I had expected, thinking he'd take what I offered right away. Instead, he slipped down and prepared my body for the invasion that was to come. Only when he was satisfied he wouldn't hurt me, he slipped inside and took my virginity. Not moving, he lifted me until I was cradled in his lap, pressed against his chest. His hair was fluttering in unseen winds and his skin was glowing, but I realized that mine was too now. I expected his eyes to be completely black still, but instead they now shone with a light that reminded me of the storm in his eyes. "We need to mark each other now, Britt, Samkamcher," Alexander said. He took one of my hands in his and placed it on his heart. I could feel it beat slowly and heavily against my fingers, each thud strong and powerful. He let go of my hand and placed his over my own heartbeat erratic and wild. I was sure it was off the charts as fast as it was beating now, a tattoo against my ribcage. No doubt Alexander, with his sensitive hearing, could hear it. Maybe he'd even be able to, without the sensitive hearing. "Have you decided where you wish to mark me?" Alexander was asking, and I really wondered how he managed to sound so controlled. There was an insane urge inside me that wanted my body to move against his. I nodded, and my hand immediately lifted his right hand, pressing the sensitive skin of his wrist against my lips. It was a good place, I had decided, because if necessary, he could hide a mark there. But if he wanted the world to see, all he'd have to do was roll up his sleeve a little bit. I was shocked when I felt his skin burning up at my kiss, fire sizzling between us. A second later, Alexander was burying his face against my skin, his lips pressing against the crook of my neck. That very spot he'd once placed a hickey on, the spot he'd singled out from day one. More fire burned between us, and it felt like power was pouring out of him like a waterfall, washing over me like an avalanche. At the same time, I felt like something was leaving me as well and pouring into him. Then, finally, Alexander started moving. When the pleasure that had taken over my body seemed to subside, did he roll over with me until I was lying on top him. We were both panting and hot and sweaty, my body completely relaxed as I lay there, draped across his body. He was still buried inside me somehow. After a while, Alexander moved his hands to stroke soft patterns across my back with his fingertips, occasionally dipping lower across the curve of my buttocks. His breathing had already gone back to normal. My head felt heavy and drowsy as I lifted my boneless arms so I could grab his shoulders and hold on to him. "I love you, Alexander." His arms momentarily tightened around me as he hugged me close to him. "I love you too, Gramo Kroy." I fought against the sleepiness, but as soon as he started humming his lullaby, I was a goner. Sleep claimed me for warm and pleasant dreams as Alexander held me to his heart, safe and close. Both of us completely relaxed and reveling in each other's nearness now, after our lovemaking. I wanted to move her head, sweep her hair sideways, and look at her neck and shoulder very badly, but refrained. I didn't want to wake her just yet. The marking process wasn't entirely over, even though the marks themselves should have appeared now. We had to seal it and then possibly bind our life forces together. Given Brit heritage, neither Samuel nor I were entirely sure if she had an immortal lifespan on her own or not. Not that it mattered much. I wouldn't want to live without her anyway, so merging our life forces wasn't a hardship. My skin was still glowing faintly with the power I was extending. It was important that I kept feeding her with it. Stimulating the feedback she was giving me, however faintly, it was what allowed her to sleep right now, effectively pausing the process for a few hours. It was unusual that the bonding happened when one of the two was still a virgin. Like with Britt, it's why I let her sleep now. I wanted her fully alert and awake for the next part, and I didn't want to drain her. That I was expending much more power than needed for this was but a small price to pay. After all, I'd pay nearly any price if it meant spending the rest of my life with her. I smoothed my hands down her back again gently and realized she was cooling down now that she was sleeping. A blanket appeared to cover us the next instant. I didn't even have to think about it. Satisfied with that at least, I thought of one thing I could do to ease my aching curiosity. I didn't want to move her to see the mark, but I could lift my own arm to see mine. I liked the spot she'd picked out, and I doubted if I'd ever want to roll down my sleeve to cover it. Really, I could care less if the world saw, if my enemies saw or not. I was better known across the supernatural world than most, even for a member of the council. Fascialixed. I stared at the marking on my wrist, surprised by the size of the mark. It was larger than usual, but that wasn't unheard of when one or both partners were powerful in their own right. At the center of my wrist, a typically Aztec marking stood out. It was a depiction of the sun, but the heart of it contained Tlan-X-Stick's typical upturned triangle. Instead of the typical lines and dots that usually decorated Aztec art, this sun was filled with the lines and stripes that made up the Ogham writing of my very own people. I hadn't seen or read Ogham in so long that I had to focus to read the words, smiling when I could decipher trust, loyalty, love, and respect. There were more, and they all had to do with our personalities and our relationship. Like ribbons. The words flared out around the sun, interspersed with flames and feathers. One flame licked up sideways across my thumb and the top of my hand, while feathers and Ogham writing ran across the palm of my hand. The feathers looked as if scattered on the wind and flowed with my skin, while the writing seemed to lie just underneath it. More flames, feathers, and Ogham writing wrapped around my wrist and up my arm, reaching till my elbow. The colors were both vivid and calming. The fire almost seemed to move and burn as if real, and the lines of the sun were silvery white like the feathers and seemed to glow. Only the writing was black. Happy and content, I returned my arm underneath the duvet to wrap it around Britt's sleeping form. Remembering our previous exercise, I smiled as I felt my body ready itself for round 2. Time to wake her and finish the marking. Just as I thought that she stirred against me, and I had to stifle a groan when she unconsciously clenched her muscles around me. At least, I think it was unconsciously, but with her I was never sure. "How are you feeling, Agaramokoroe?" I asked as I shifted my hips to make her aware of me inside her still. Although I doubted she would miss it, I just hoped she wasn't sore or hurting. I healed her as soon as I could when I took her virginity, of course, but this was a first for her. I didn't want her to be uncomfortable in any way. She lifted her head and sent me a lazy smile, those sinfully long lashes of hers coming down a second, framing her topaz eyes. I swear my heart stuttered for a moment, and that was a feat because it didn't really function like a normal heart in the first place. "I feel great, you?" she replied, her voice a little husky and a lot sexy. I smirked, knowing it was because of all the moaning she'd done. "Amazing," I replied. "I can tell, you're glowing." She was smirking herself as she stretched out across me like a cat, a very content cat. Rolling my eyes at her, I nodded. "Of course, we're not done yet, Arun. Besides, you're glowing too. Not tired anymore?" "No, what do you mean not done?" she asked. I couldn't help but tease her. "I'm never going to be done with you, Britt." Okay, so that was probably the truth. It was her that was teasing me with her little sounds, how I'd ever managed to control myself with her for so long. It was beyond me now. She'd closed her beautiful eyes and lifted her head as she straddled me, her hair thrown back across her shoulders. It was the first time I could look at her mark, and the sight made me hot and cold and very proud. It was, of course, identical to mine, but on her golden skin, it looked breathtaking. The Aztec sun symbol was situated right at the crook of her neck above her clavicle, my favorite spot, with the flames and feathers and writing spiraling outwards around it. writing curved around her throat and elegantly around her ear, while the flames came alive in between it, feathers fluttering out in silver and golden streaks. One feather lay teasingly on top of the curve of her breast, a curl of black writing spelling the word love around it. The last part was the vow, the ritual words to bind us as mates together. They could of course be anything, as long as the intention was the right one. But the vow that came to the forefront of my mind was an ancient Celtic blood vow that my mother had taught me. A vow that she had presided over many a time during weddings in her long years as the village Cailleach. There had been blood when I took her virginity, so it was fitting in a way. Is to filo mo quizlan, is to kanema de mokneam, I said softly, my voice still carrying across the room as the power running between us took hold of the words, making them binding like no marriage vow could ever be. Britt knew what was happening the moment I spoke and echoed me, her pronunciation of the Gaelic flawless and beautiful. Is litsa mo bodaig, chum gum bisin in our en. The second line of the vow slipped from my throat a little more huskily. All I could see was her golden eyes glowing as she met mine, confidence and love clearly written on her features. I lost track of what I was doing, but it was all right. She spoke the last line of the vow as if she really did know. Is litsa manam gus and kriochnaik ar sauchal. Maybe more than power had been exchanged while she slept. I repeated the last words back to her, unable to keep the smile from my face. I just had to add, Tagra agam, do it. For the first time in years, I felt young again. I was happier than I was on my wedding day 15 centuries ago. In the moments after that, we were lost to each other as we made love for the second time that day. Mated in full now, it was even better than before. The heat and pleasure from our joined bodies, enhanced by the magic that bound us together. Only after we lay side by side, spent, did I whisper to her the optional last part of the mating ritual. I didn't think she would decline, but for some reason, my stomach still clenched as if expecting rejection. Britt, there's one last thing we can do. We're already mated in full, but it's possible to entwine our life forces together. That way you'll live and age as I do, and if either of us would die, we both would. I don't want to live without you, I added. I clenched my arm around her shoulder more tightly as I felt the force of that statement slam into me. I really did not want to go on without her by my side. She was strong and courageous, and I knew I'd made mistakes the way I'd tried to keep her from my world. Yet still she forgave me and loved me. I wasn't sure if I deserved her, but I was selfish enough to know I would never let her go. Does that mean I get to live forever without having to do the whole vampire thing? She asked, smiling up at me. Really, those lashes should be illegal. They were so long. I chuckled and smiled in satisfaction when that made her shiver. For some reason, she really loved it when I did that. Yes, se gramo croi. We'd be entwining our souls. That is what soulmate means. We are so compatible that our very essences can be entwined. Magic of the purest kind. She was nodding already and sitting up. Tell me what to do. There was no hesitation, no doubt in her. I took a moment to ascertain myself of that fact, but really could find none. She wanted this. She was happy even. That she wouldn't have to drink blood. I'd never had a problem with it, but she seemed queasy about the thought. Very well. I sat up as well and turned to face her. Since we need to bind not just our souls, but our more mortal bodies together as well, there needs to be another exchange. Sliding closer, I pulled her in between my legs, the duvet pooling around us. I couldn't get enough of the feeling of my skin against hers. She was so soft and warm. This once, Britt. This once we need to exchange a little blood. I tried to keep my voice gentle. I didn't want to scare her. As I spoke, I held up my left hand and manifested a bowl in it, the exact one my mother used in her ceremonies. It was red earthen ceramic with Celtic decorations on the side, artfully made by my father himself. In my other hand, I manifested the ceremonial knife and easily slid it across my palm to drip some blood into the bowl. I heard her gasp, but I hardly even noticed the slight bite of the blade. The cut almost instantly healed, leaving no trace. Do I need to drink that? She asked, her voice for once timid, but the way she was jutting out her chin told me she had made up her mind and wouldn't back down. No, we mix it in the bowl, a gay ar mokoi. I was powerful enough to do the binding with blood outside our bodies. I wouldn't subject her to something she obviously felt uncomfortable about. I couldn't protect her from all cruelty. But this, I knew she didn't have to do. Oh, Bravely, she held up her own hand above the ceramic bowl for me to cut with the knife. I smiled gently as I used my powers to lift the bowl. With my now freed hand, I took hold of hers. I'll heal you right away or run, but it will still hurt a little. With my right hand, the arm that bore her mark now, I brought the knife to hover right above her opened palm. Before she could back away or get nervous in anticipation of the pain, I brought the knife down in a quick but shallow stroke. Red welled up along the slash, and I gently squeezed her hand to allow some of the blood to drip into the floating bowl and mix with mine. Then I sent a flash of power across her palm to seal the cut closed without a scar. She didn't even flinch, and my heart swelled in pride as she focused her golden eyes on the floating bowl. I could tell that already her own rather undeveloped powers started pouring out of her, mixing in with the blood. I allowed the knife to disappear and focused on the bowl myself, using my own powers to finish the bond that she'd already started to form herself. Instinctively, she seemed to know how everything worked. As I finished this final binding, I realized how fitting our ritual vows had been. They would fit this almost as well, if not better. When that was done, I set fire to the contents of the bowl with a lazy touch of my mind, allowing the bowl to disappear a second later. There. Now you are mine forever. I tugged her into my arms so I could hold her close. She was so small compared to me, her bones fragile underneath her skin. But I loved how she had a spine of steel, how she'd never back down when she had decided on something. And you are mine too, she said, a little defiance in her tone that warned me she didn't like it when I claimed ownership like that. She wanted everyone to know I was hers too. I rather wanted that myself, so I chuckled. Yes, completely and utterly yours. A gramo croy. I reeling with everything away about the anti-cout. Remember wavingly, and I sat up immediately. Around me the bed was a mess. The duvet rumpled and part of it had fallen to the floor. For some reason, my pillow was there as well, but that was okay. I'd been using Alexander's chest as a pillow instead. He was already getting out of the bed and manifested clothes on himself the second he stepped onto carpet. Black slacks and a dark gray shirt that matched his eyes. The right sleeve rolled up to display the mark for everyone to see. His hair was still a complete mess from our earlier activities. The thought alone made me blush a scarlet red. But he didn't seem to notice as he started across the room towards the door. He stopped in front of it to turn and look at me, a smirk on his face. Then clothes appeared on my own body, snug black jeans and a dark red top with a wide and low neckline so that none of the mark there was covered. When I was dressed, he nodded once and opened the door. Jaden stood in front of it, dressed once more in an immaculate suit with a tie that matched his glowing eyes. Sunglasses covered them, though, as he peered around Alexander into the room, his gaze taking in first the mark on my neck and then the rumpled sheets. A smirk appeared, and I felt my face heat up as he puzzled together what had just taken place this afternoon. I expected a comment about it, but all he said was, "You picked a mighty good time to do that. Samuel is back." Immediately, Alexander stiffened, and I felt a wave of unease roll off him before he straightened and nodded. "Very well, where is he?" he asked, looking back over his shoulder to meet my eyes. "Your grandfather. His here, Brittany." Shocked by that news, I stumbled out of the bed. This was not happening. I'd just had mind-blowing sex with my soulmate, marking each other for the whole world to see. And now my grandfather shows up? Everyone was going to know what we'd just done if they saw the mark? I found myself frantically going through the closet, tossing clothes over my shoulders as I discarded them. Something that would cover the mark but made me look elegant too. I couldn't go around looking like I normally did when I was about to meet an archangel. Warm hands grabbed me by my shoulders and pulled me back against a solid chest. "Calm down, Agramokroy. It's gonna be fine." "You look fine," Alexander said. He was drawing me with him towards the door. Obviously, he thought my clothes looked just fine. "Alexander," I exclaimed. "I'm not wearing a bra yet." Mortified, I turned when I heard Jaden burst out in laughter. Damn it! I forgot he was still there. Alexander was laughing too. "Why didn't you say so?" He snapped his fingers, and immediately I felt the familiar feeling of the stupid clothing article. It was a strapless bra, however, so that there was still nothing covering the mark. I started to open my mouth to say I wanted to cover it, but then realized that he probably wouldn't like it. He might even feel hurt. We'd just marked each other, and now I was acting as if I wanted to hide that fact. As if I didn't want him. coming to the conclusion that I found it more important to show Alexander I loved him and didn't regret this than hiding the mark from my grandfather. I turned and allowed him to lead me out the door. Jaden led the way down the stairs to a private sitting room. Jaden knocked and then respectfully stepped aside, not entering as Alexander swung open the door and strode into the room. He had a tight grip on my hand and pulled me with me before I could protest and succumb to my nerves. Samuel stood in front of a large fireplace. His tall frame leaned against it in a show of relaxation, as if he wasn't in the least intimidated by the imposing angel who stood on the other side of the room, taking up enough space to look towering. The Viking-like man wore that same leather jacket covered with golden scrollwork that looked so typically Scandinavian. His stance was relaxed, but his blue eyes were tightly fixed on that angel, as if he was watching his nemesis. But the other man in the room drew my eyes almost immediately. Standing in front of the windows, his back turned towards the room, all I could see was a set of large wings. They appeared to be made of light in the flickering fire. If he spread out those wings, they would span the entire side of the room, easily 20 feet. Other than that, all I could see of him was the long black hair flowing down his back in a tight braid that nearly came to his calves. Red and gold threads woven in between and crisscrossing around it. As we stepped into the room, Samuel straightened and nodded at Alexander. He had a grimace on his face that told me he wasn't very pleased, but then his eyes skimmed down over me and widened when he noticed the mark. He smirked, a devilish glint appearing in his eyes. "Hello, my lord." He spoke the words carefully, and they were bordering on too respectful, but it was clear he was mocking my mate, teasing him. I expected Alexander to say something about it, to put the Titan in his place, but instead he smiled widely. "Always good to see you, Sammy." Samuel laughed and resumed his easy pose, leaning against the hearth. Alexander smiled down at me encouragingly and then let go of my hand. He stepped across the room in a slow, confident stride and paused right next to the angel, his shoulder almost brushing that folded back wing of light. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Tlenextic," he said. "I trust my people showed you your rooms and nothing but the utmost respect." I couldn't tell if Tlenextic nodded or not, but Alexander continued. "How was the journey here?" This time I definitely saw a reaction. The white light wings snapped even closer in against the body so that his long braid was hidden from view. His shoulders shook as if he stiffened, and then I heard a deeply accented but warm and powerful voice. "Let's cut the crap. All these nonsense formalities mean nothing. Just take me to my granddaughter." Well, at least he was direct. Alexander was nodding. "She's already here." He was glancing at me from the corner of his eyes, as if checking that I really was still there. Had I looked that ready to bolt? At Alexander's words, Tlenextic turned around so quickly that I felt a wind stir against the bare skin of my throat and arms. His wings were big enough to create so much displacement in the air that I could feel it. I gasped when I finally saw his face. He looked no older than 30 at the most, a man in his prime, powerful, intimidating, and frighteningly beautiful. I'd never seen a man this beautiful, yet still masculine. His black hair was pulled back from his face in that braid, gathered at the nape of his neck. But beads were woven into 2 smaller braids on either side of his face that fell down all the way to his knees. I wondered if they didn't get in the way with daily things. It didn't seem very practical to me, but it did look impressive. His expression was stern and austere, with straight black eyebrows and a mouth drawn in a tight line. His cheekbones high and his skin a red golden tint that hinted at warmer climates. But his eyes were the same exact shade as mine. A topaz that sparked and hinted at sunshine and warmth and rainforests or beaches. "Brittany?" He spoke as he looked at me, his eyes focusing on the mark on my neck, clearly on display. I froze, completely unsure of what to do next, of how to even react. How was I supposed to react in a situation like this? What did I say to my long-lost grandfather? After I just mated Alexander? Luckily, he moved first, lifting one elegant hand to place against my cheek, his thumb rubbing gently over my skin. "You've grown so fast," he said, sounding genuinely surprised about that, as if he expected me to be a little girl still. He stepped closer till there was only a foot between us, heat radiating off of him as if he was a furnace. The air around him felt alive, moving with warm currents. An intent look on his face told me he was studying me closely, trying to figure something out. A complicated puzzle, judged by his frown. I felt like I should say something, but the words died in my throat. Really, what could I say? Why? Tilanixtic spoke, suddenly swirling around to face Alexander again, the impressive wings of light spreading out to enfold me somewhat and shield me from the rest of the room. Suddenly, I was regretting staying near the wall. I was completely cornered. Why did you take my little girl? My Yolotli? Somehow the archangel made those words, although accusing, sound rather flat, as if there was no real emotion behind them. But I also immediately knew it was an act. This man hadn't gone cold. He was fire and sunlight. His very essence was warmth. I moved instinctively even as Alexander spoke. She's not just your Yolotli, she's mine too. Alexander's voice was cold too, obviously angry about the fact that Tlanextic was placing himself between us. Alexander sounded possessive, and along the bond between us, I could clearly feel that he was only staying where he was because he was clinging to his control by his fingernails. Sliding further in between the archangel's wings, I wrapped my arms tightly around his lean waist. He was much slimmer and slighter in build than Alexander, and my arms easily met in the front. As I did it, the man moved forward as if to go for Alexander's throat, only to freeze in his tracks again and stare down at my arms incredulously. He was obviously not used to anyone touching him just like that. His entire body became tense and coiled like a spring, the air around me becoming hotter, as if the temperatures rose along with Tlanextic's temper. I closed my eyes and pressed my face into his back, right between his shoulder blades where his wings grew out of his back. The muscles underneath my cheek were strong and very well developed. It wasn't magic that made them fly, but real power. Pure strength was what propelled Bee's wings when in flight. I couldn't see Alexander, but I felt him move closer in a flash. Don't you dare! The snarl that ripped out of his throat was downright feral and terrifying. I felt Tlanixtic's body shake, and then there was a metallic sound as something fell to the floor with a clang. Casting my eyes downward, I spotted a mean-looking curved dagger, the hilt decorated with an Aztec sun, the heart of it an upturned triangle. Tlanixtic's sign. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat in shock. Had the angel been about to stab me with that thing? Or was he going for Alexander? I didn't think Alexander would respond that fiercely if had been meant for him, though. The next second, Alexander flew across the room and glass broke and shattered as he hit the large French doors. A loud curse was yelled out in a language I really didn't know, and then suddenly everything became eerily quiet. I could feel that Alexander wasn't hurt, but that he was beyond furious. Somehow a force was pinning him to the ground into the broken remains of the door. But strangely enough, I also knew that Tlanextic was shocked and only now coming to his senses. Surprisingly, he seemed to feel contrite, as if he regretted his actions of before. I could feel his body softening in my embrace, and then he was nodding, to who I didn't know. Yet a subtle movement in his body made me realize that he too had been pinned back by an unseen force, a force that had been removed after his nod. Was that Samuel's doing? And what the hell was a Titan capable of if he could immobilize Alexander and Tlanextic at the same time? Slowly, I let go off the archangel, stumbling back as far as the little space between me and the wall allowed. Forgive me my actions. Calm down your mate, little Yolotli, Tlanextic said, stepping a little to the side so I could see what had happened in the room. His voice was missing the carefully practiced coldness of before, sounding truly remorseful and slightly worried. He snapped his wings tightly into his back, folding them until I could step past him easily without even brushing against him. As I stepped forward, I realized he was holding one of his hands, forcing his wrist straight as if the bones had been snapped and he was realigning them. Samuel stood in the middle of the room, holding out one hand towards Alexander as if he was holding him down with it. The other hand he had raised towards Tlanextic but was relaxed, as if he wasn't doing anything but staying alert in case he had to respond quickly. In the door opening stood Jaden, in panther form and ready to pounce at any second. The cat's eyes were trained solely on the archangel, but I hardly noticed any of that as I hurried across the room towards Alexander. He was flat on his back, surrounded by debris, just outside the house on the lawn. As I neared him, Samuel apparently lowered the force field or whatever it was he was doing. Immediately, Alexander's growl of frustration ripped through the air. He was on his feet in a flash and then strode into the room. Behind him, the French doors repaired themselves miraculously, but his shirt remained in tatters, red staining it. a fine line of blood across one of his cheeks, the high cheekbone thrown into relief because of it. He was about to stride right past me as if he was going back just so he could hurt Tlenextic again. But I stepped in his way immediately. Alexander. His eyes were completely black as they snapped to mine, but as soon as I diverted his attention, I felt him calm down. He scanned my form once and then swept into my mind easily as he searched for any hurts or pains. I'm fine, I told him out loud as I reached out my arms for him. He didn't hesitate to sweep me up and hold me close to his chest, his chin resting on my shoulder as he kept a close watch on everyone else in the room. I ran my own hands up his back, checking for injuries, but I met only smooth skin. All his injuries already healed, still my hands came away red. I'm truly all right, Alexander. He's regretting his actions now. He never meant to hurt me, he's just not used to anyone touching him. It was my mistake. I didn't want him to attack you. I tried to send him the clear sensations I'd felt from Tlenextic's feelings when I was touching him. He was going to stab you, Brittany. I cannot forgive him for that. Alexander's voice was a growl in my head as he moved sideways around Samuel to get nearer to the door where Jaden was still waiting readily. I think you had better leave. Granddaughter or not, you will not hurt her, Alexander spoke out loud, but he sounded like a man again. His voice holding that horrible cold tone, tightly controlled anger. I don't want him to leave. And I can forgive him, so I'm sure you can too, I replied, pushing against his shoulders to get him to put me down again. He did so only when he'd moved behind Jaden, the huge panther forming a shield between me and Tlenextic. As soon as my feet touched the floor, I spun so I could look at my grandfather. He was still in exactly the same spot, his face impassible as he looked at Alexander calmly. I see I have nothing to worry about when it comes to Brittany's care. She's in very capable hands. How did you ever manage to trick the Jotun into serving you? This particular Jotun even. He spoke with his empty voice. Still, I could hear the real curiosity underneath it. He was feeling things, but for some reason he desperately tried to hide this fact. I could only wonder why. It's none of your business, Archangel, Samuel snapped angrily. He seemed to have finally decided that he rather wanted Tlenextic to leave as well, moving to stand beside Alexander with one hand raised by his shoulder, as if he was ready to draw that huge sword of his. Tlenextic tiesked as if looking at a naughty schoolboy and then said, Tier, still no manners I see. Why ever do you go by such a mundane name nowadays? Don't tell me you're ashamed, are you? What was he doing? Pissing off Samuel on purpose now? Driving Alexander insane? He didn't even need to taunt Jaden. The panther was already bristling in defense of his friends. Did he consider the Titan part of his pack too? That's enough, Tlenextic. I invited you so Brittany could meet you, but you've broken the rules of hospitality more than once. Leave! Alexander's voice thundered across the room and I flinched in surprise. Tlenextic straightened and turned his topaz eyes on my mate, one finely arched eyebrow raised. I think you broke a more ancient rule first. Clitton, I'm not demanding restitution for that. All I want now is a short moment to talk with my own granddaughter. I will leave immediately after that. No, you nearly hurt her. I don't care about rules or restitution. I want you out of my house and out of my territory. As Alexander spoke, the black of his eyes started bleeding out into the white again. Alexander was absolutely furious and horrified by tonight's events. It felt like it was sort of my own fault, though. I had been the one to hug Tlenextic. Though I was only able to sense his feelings clearly when I touched him, I should have known he wouldn't respond well to it. Of course you'd expect such an ancient creature to have a better control of himself and his reflexes. Although, when I realized that in Shamali's memory, Tlenextic had been nearly a god. He was someone no one just approached, and it was saying a lot that he'd even showed up here to meet me all alone. I stepped forward, trusting now that the man that had been responsible for sending away the demon from my mother once, the man responsible for my protection these past 13 years, if not longer, would not hurt me. Alexander's hand clamped on my shoulder, and Jaden moved so his hind leg pressed against my legs, keeping me away from Tlenextic. Fighting not to roll my eyes at their overprotectiveness, I curled a hand into Jaden's fur and drew a dagger from the holster at my waist. Hey Jay, remember when you said to remind you not to get on my bad side? I'm reminding you now. The panther's large head swiveled around to look at me, his eyes clearly saying, you wouldn't. Telanixtic's eyes were focused on me too, intrigued by what I was going to do. It was obvious that he hadn't expected me to wear weapons on my person or that I appeared willing to use them. Alexander's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Brittany, what are you doing? It's for the best, trust me." Clearly he couldn't see reason right now. The fact that Telanixtic hadn't been able to restrain a reflex and nearly hurt me, added to the fact that the angel had moved as if to take me away from him. I wondered what had caused Telanixtic to respond so irrationally to touch. I ran the tip of the dagger over Jaden's hip, letting him know that I was holding it but not actually hurting him. "Let me pass, Jay." I stepped forward again, shrugging out from Alexander's grasp. Jaden's feline body flowed with me, carefully staying in between me and the archangel but allowing me to get closer. At about 3 feet away, I stopped, keeping my eyes trained on Telanixtic and one hand tightly clenched in Jaden's fur. It felt like there was a nearly tangible line of tension running between me and Alexander. 5 minutes, I said. It's all you're going to get to talk, because I don't think anyone's nerves here will last much longer. So, talk. Telanixtic's eyes widened a fraction as if he was shocked by my words, but then his stern features softened. I only knew that happened, though, because I felt the tenderness he was feeling wash over me. "I had hoped to bring you home with me, Brittany," the ash angel spoke slowly, his voice carrying the sounds of rainforests and nature. I could feel Alexander's body tense even more. He seemed ready to pounce and snatch me out of Telanixtic's reach. Telanixtic raised his hand as if to silence us and ease our minds. "But I see that I cannot take you away from your mate." At those words, Alexander angrily spoke. "You're damn right you can't. At least I know that you are as safe as you can be. Alexander Clitton is a man of honor and loyalty. He would never forsake you. I am happy." There was again no emotion in his voice, even as he spoke about feeling happy. But I knew that he really was feeling this underneath the icy armor. I sensed that Telanixtic wanted to say more, explain more, but he was a private person, and already he feared he'd shown too much of himself. One did not become a Regis and sit on the council for as long as he had by being open and sharing. Searching my mind quickly, I found exactly what I'd expected to be there. A link, much like between me and Alexander, running to Telanixtic as well. It was much fainter and weaker, but definitely there, and I suppose that it was what allowed me to feel his emotions. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Hola?" I asked him. It was a question that had been burning in my mind for a long time now. If he'd come sooner, maybe my mother wouldn't have died, and maybe Andy and I wouldn't have had to live with the Bakers. Or if he'd at least protected my mother, she wouldn't have been attacked and raped by a demon. Telanixtic didn't move a muscle, but I felt shock rezo Alex within him at the easiness with which I'd initiated mental contact with him. "I forgot. It is unforgivable, but time has no meaning when you've lived as long as I did. I simply forgot for a while. Your mother? It pains me to have never known her." "Forgot for a while? As in, he forgot about us, my mother's entire lifetime. Was that why he left my grandmother too, tending to a child all by herself? I loved Daya, but I had to leave. She had her tribe to help her. She wasn't alone, and she knew my reasons. I would have come for her had she called." The emotions sparked hotly between our minds, and I knew how much he'd loved my grandmother instantly. He was still mourning for her. In fact, it was shown in the red ribbons in his hair. They symbolized the blood his heart bled for her. The black that he wore from head to toe, relieved only by the white of his shirt. "My grandmother left her tribe shortly after my mother was born. She never went back," I told him. He had to know the truth. I couldn't believe that he'd never looked back until that one day that he'd ordered Shamali to protect me, and why me, but not Andy? Sadness that showed even in his topaz eyes now as he gazed at me. "I know. I send her money and guards. Anything she needed to survive. She was so proud, my little Yolatli. Daya would not take anything from me. When she died, I wished to forget, and I did. Until you called out to me, Brittany. After that, I send one of my most competent people to shadow you, night and day. I even came to see you a few times." I nodded and then smiled sadly. Shamali died. Thornton had him killed. The uneasy shuffling in the room made me realize that I'd spoken out loud, and that only a short time had passed. "I know. The people that took him have been taken care of already. Shamali was chosen for his ability to change form and blend in, as well as his fighting skills and long-range telepathy. He managed to give my hand as many details as possible just before he died. I would like to take his body with me when I return home. Surprisingly, Alexander spoke. To do what? Talanicstick sounded colder than before when he spoke, and I sensed that he was offended by Alexander's mistrust. To give him the burial he deserves? Why else? He protected my granddaughter with his life. It's the least I can do. Alexander nodded. I'll have it prepared for travel. He seemed on edge still, but slightly placated by the way Talanicstick had acted and spoken since. As soon as it's here, you leave. My grandfather nodded. Very well. Yalatli? Amusement shone through as he spoke in my mind again. Your mate will take a long time to warm up to me. Will you tell him I am truly sorry? And will you forgive me for my earlier behavior? I never intended to hurt you. He was struggling to put into words what he really felt. As a Regis and archangel, he wasn't used to apologizing, and he wasn't used to someone knowing what he felt either. I know. You're forgiven, grandfather. I hurried to say to him, trying to reassure him that I bore him no hard feelings for the whole situation. I did feel a bit awkward about calling him grandfather because he looked to be in his early 30s. He just didn't have the whole grandpa aura. Talanicstick was clearly fighting to keep a smile from his face, and I felt his laughter inside him. You can call me Eahu or Ea, my little Yalatli. It is my first name. Ura Ea. I have just one more question if that's okay. I said, smiling myself now and letting go of Jaden's soft fur. The panther was still tense, but he was allowing me to inch a little closer now. Had he decided that himself, or had Alexander told him to give me more space? Of course. The angel inclined his head to me. Anything. Why did you protect me but not Andy? A silence stretched across the room as everyone strained to listen to his answer. It seemed like it was something they all had been wondering. Talanicstick's face showed a clear emotion for the first time since his arrival. Desolation. I think it shocked everyone but me that he had emotion to show so clearly. My little Yalatli. I wished, Talanicstick faltered as his voice reflected bone-wrenching sadness. The demon, the one that hurt my poor baby, he was smarter, more careful the second time. When you called for me that first time, I put magic spells on both you and your mother to protect you, but it turned out that Andy, in your mother's womb at that time, didn't get the protection from it. The demon was there before I could return, and used his own magic on him to keep me away. I cannot approach Andy or touch him. His desire to reach out to Andy and help him, be a father to him, was tangible in the air. Jaden responded to it by stepping a bit to the side so that I could move past him, leaning forward as if to rub his big head against the archangel's leg in comfort. He stopped himself short before actually doing so. I've noticed it and have a team of witches working on it to remove the demon's spells, but I fear that the only way is to kill the demon, Alexander said, his voice finally normal again, and his emotions through our bond showed me he wasn't angry any longer but still cautious. I felt angry myself now that horrible demon had done this to Andy, to us. I knew I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. But I'd rather not exist if that meant my mother was happy and healthy. Just then there was a knock on the door, and Samuel quickly hurried over and opened it. A man stood on the other side of the door that I faintly recognized, clearly one of Alexander's more trusted men if he was allowed inside the house. The man was holding a box of dark, polished wood. On it, a Celtic design in dark gold had been embossed. Samuel took the box without a word and closed the door again. He strode over to Alexander and handed him the box. For a moment, I saw Alexander frown as if he was wondering something, but then he nodded slowly and turned to Talanicstick. These are Chimali's remains. It is time for you to leave now. Talanicstick nodded, his face again carefully schooled and devoid of emotions. Very well, I hope to see you again soon, my little Yalatli. Alexander Clitton, take good care of her. Let us both work tirelessly to free Andy from the magic of his father. Alexander nodded, but I felt sad that he had to leave so soon, moving slowly so that he could warn me off any time I stepped forward to hug Talanicstick again. Thank you for coming to see me, Ia. I expected him to stop me any time, or that Alexander would interfere, but instead I could step closer and carefully wrap my arms around the ancient creature's waist. He was warm and real, and although he stiffened for a short moment, he leaned into me and actually returned the hug, wrapping his long, slender arms around me gently. I will think of you, Yolatli. All you have to do is call, and I will come, he whispered in my ear, tugging once on my mother's pendant. I know, I replied, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of nature that clung to him. It was then that my mind was suddenly assaulted with images that were definitely not mine. Tonextic stripped bare and bound between heavy black poles, his magnificent wings of light gone, torn off his back so that a disarray of bloody feathers lay around him. A figure wearing nothing but black, face covered by a mask, was using a long, wicked knife to cut thin lines into his flesh. The lines painted the angel's skin red and covered nearly every inch of his flesh, all but his face and hands. Tonextic didn't utter a single cry as he hung between the poles, but his face was a mask of agony. I gasped and staggered back, staring up at my grandfather's face in shock. Shock whispered across his face too for a short moment before he shook his head. He had not meant to share that with me, but at least now I understood why he'd responded so reflexively to touch. Farewell, he spoke, accepting the box from Alexander, and then striding over to the newly repaired French doors. They opened for him before he'd reached them, and he stepped out into the night air, his wings already spreading as he prepared to take flight. He cast me a look over his shoulder, a nod, and then he started beating those wings of light. The sight of him taking off vertically from the terrace was magnificent. As he pierced the night sky, his wings reflected every bit of light. They shone, pure beacons of light and beauty. Within seconds, he disappeared as he pierced the layer of clouds and placed more and more distance between us. Won't humans see him? Couldn't Danis teleport him? I asked. Alexander wrapped his arms around me from behind, tugging me into the warmth of his body. No, they won't. Humans cannot remember seeing angels. Usually, only the rare one does, and they typically think they really saw an angel and think it is a sign or something sacred. Oink. A miracle. Convenient for them, don't you think? Samuel, with his musical accent, said, Danis couldn't teleport an angel even if he tried. They're the only creatures I know of that cannot be teleported by any force. He sounded somewhat rueful, as if he himself had experienced teleporting against his will more than once. Alexander and I didn't talk again till after dinner, which we spent in the large kitchen. Surprisingly, Samuel and Jaden joined us as well, so for once there were more people actually eating than just sitting around. I had thought Jaden ate a lot, but damn, Samuel easily ate twice as much, if not more. It seemed, however, that Danis had been warned about it because he'd made loads more food than usual, so there was enough for everyone. Andy didn't know, of course, that our grandfather had been here, and I decided not to tell him. It would only make him sad to know he'd missed him, and that he might never be able to see him. The boy was unusually quiet as he looked around and focused his golden eyes that looked so much like Tonextic's on everyone. First he stared at Alexander as if trying to figure out what my mate was thinking. Alexander was leaning back in his chair, his long legs stretched out underneath the table as he carefully surveyed the room. One arm he'd spread out along the back of my chair so he could occasionally stroke his long fingers along the nape of my neck or run them through my hair. But despite the easygoing posture, he was still incredibly tense and worried. He wasn't sure if he'd done the right thing by inviting Tonextic here, that much was sure. It was clear that Andy could sense Alexander's tension, and by the focused look on his face, he was trying to ease it somehow. I wasn't sure what he was doing or if I was just imagining it, but he wasn't just very emphatic. He seemed to be able to actually influence people for the better. After a while, I could almost feel the tension drain away from my mate, and that's the moment Andy's attention switched from Alexander to Samuel. The big man had taken off his blade and carefully balanced it against the table right next to him, his chair a little pulled sideways so that he could face the entire room as he ate. He seemed intent on eating his food, which he did with the table manners of a Viking. Not surprising because he probably lived at that time. Samuel didn't speak or make rude jokes and jibes like I had come to expect from him, his eyes occasionally drifting towards Alexander or Jaden. But when Andy focused his attention on him, he visibly stiffened, as if he noticed something unpleasant or surprising. Shortly after, however, dinner was finished, and the Viking excused himself with a brusque nod and a few growled words. Alexander let him go without saying anything, at least not vocally. But I had the feeling he could speak with the Viking mentally, just like he could with me. Well, maybe not exactly the same, but still. I took Andy upstairs for bed and tucked him in. As usual, I read him a few pages from one of his books, and soon he was ready to sleep. For once, he insisted I sing him a lullaby again, which I did with a strange feeling of déjà vu. Alexander's lullaby came so easily to me as I sang that I really wondered how I'd picked it up so fast. This was only the second time I sang it myself, but I knew it word for word by heart, and I had from the start. As I closed the door to his room behind me, Alexander was right there, leaning against the opposite wall as if he'd been waiting for me. His stormy eyes piercing as he gazed at me, but his words were gentle. "You have a beautiful voice. Britt, I wish you'd sing for me as well." A smile made his face look less stern. I started to blush as he flowed to his feet and reached his hand out to me, pulling me into his side and then quickly guiding me to our bedroom. "We are going back to school tomorrow, just a few more days, and then we're moving back to my stronghold," he informed me as he used his powers to close the door behind us. With one hand, he softly stroked across my now marked skin. "You are connected to him, by his spell." He trailed off, sounding unhappy about it. He was talking about my grandfather now, forcing my mind to jump to that conclusion after the bomb he'd just dropped on me. With an impatient snap of his fingers, my clothing changed to sleeping attire, something I'd never put on myself. A slinky black and red negligee that hid very little and emphasized a lot. "Really? Is that all you can think about?" I asked, one eyebrow raised sardonically. He shrugged as he let his eyes rove across my body. "What can I say? You look good in it. Really good." Before I could reach the closet to find something more appropriate to wear for bed, he wrapped me in his arms from behind, then tilted my head so he could attack my mouth with a mind-blowing kiss. "This should be a day of celebration. We made it. Let's think about our responsibilities tomorrow," he told me. Suddenly, I realized what he was doing, distracting me from being upset about Tlenextic, nearly stabbing me in his own response to all that. "You are going to give him a chance, okay? No forbidding me to see him," I ordered. "You can see him if I think he's no threat to you or to Hay. You promised me that you wouldn't fight me on your protection." Alexander was deadly serious as he spoke. No room for argument there. Boy, did it suck that he used that promise against me like that. But scowling, I nodded. "But you'll be fair about it. He's not gone cold like you said. He's filled with emotions. I could feel them." Alexander appeared not to believe me, but he was done talking now, attaching his mouth to the center of my mark and sending pleasure through my body so intense that my legs gave way. Not that it mattered. Alexander held me upright against him without effort, with my back pressed against his front, one arm like a vice around my waist to hold me up, my head pressed to the side to allow him access to my mark, so he could lick and kiss and nibble to his heart's content. Waves of warmth washed over me, and my body felt hot and heavy under his administrations. I tried to remember what he had been saying before, but he left me no chance for that. If Alexander Clitton wanted me distracted, he had no problem achieving it. He took me to the bed and made love to me long and hard until I was so exhausted, I fell asleep in total ecstasy. I woke up to Alexander softly stroking his fingers through my hair, balanced on his elbow above me with his long body leaning over me, one leg draped over mine. "Morning, agramo kroy. Are you ready for school for one last week?" he asked me softly. "One last week of school, and then I didn't have to finish it and get my diploma, go on to college. Did I want that? It was obvious that Alexander much preferred it if I just stay by his side as much as possible. I suppose. Do you think Fort and his gang will give us problems again?" I asked as I scrunched up my face, my wrist sending me a painful pang in remembrance of our last encounter. "There is nothing to be worried about. I'll keep mental tabs on you, and Danis will be ready to flash you out at any moment on my order. Jaden and Saraton both will be close by at all times," Alexander told me reassuringly as he got up out of bed. He disappeared into the bathroom but reappeared a short moment later. "It's unfortunate, Alex, that Thomas was killed and that the Pax rule has fallen to that mutt Fort. But you'll be perfectly safe a run," he said as he took his own sweet time getting dressed, not caring one bit about being naked or cold. "If he's smart, he stays away from you and saves his own hide," he added, returning to my side wearing a crisp white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, the mark clearly on display. Black slacks flowed over his legs, obviously expensive, and the shoes he wore appeared Italian and custom-made. "Now get up a gramoshkoi. I'm sure you don't want me to dress you for school." He sure was right about that. But I really didn't want to go anyway. People would be talking about me. Plus, despite what Alexander said and believed, I knew Fort would never leave us in peace. I'd glimpsed insanity in his eyes. He wouldn't stop until he had me or couldn't reach me any longer. Going to Alexander's stronghold, whatever that was, seemed like a pretty good idea, even if that might mean waiting a year or so before finishing school and going to college. Sliding out of the warm bed, I wobbled for a moment. My legs felt like jelly, and my body felt heavy from last night's activities. Alexander's definition of celebrating our mating seemed to mean only one thing: sex. But damn, it was the most amazing thing ever. I flushed scarlet and felt my body heat up just from remembering. Alexander's chuckle made me realize that he was aware of my thoughts as he watched me get dressed and do my morning routine in a hurry. I decided on jeans and, with a look at Alexander, a long-sleeved snug shirt with a very wide neckline, so that the mark wasn't covered either. I assume you will cover yours so that nobody will wonder why we have matching tattoos. Mine would have to be visible to scare off Fort and his pack, although Weirs should be able to smell it too. No, Alexander answered as he led me downstairs to the kitchen for breakfast. I will cover yours for human eyes only. What about my wrist? Last they saw me at school, it was broken. I didn't want people to wonder about that and ask questions I couldn't answer. The nurse was mistaken. It was only bruised, Alexander replied. He seemed to have thought about everything. The hours of the SAST and in the Whirlpacks, braiding of Westtown High came into view way too soon for my taste. Sprawled out, the building looked as if it had been expanded several times over to accommodate for the growing amount of students. Bob got out of the car first and held out his hand for me with a smile, a real one that showed not a single hint of feign. Don't worry, sweetie, it'll be fine. Alex is a master at planning. Jaden behind the steering wheel hemped before saying, he had help, you know. But then he laughed warmly and winked at me. We got your back, kid. Thornton won't bother you at the school. Even he won't sink that low. And me and Sir and my men can wipe the floor with those mutts here anytime. Hell, even you can wipe the floor with him if you can knock out a dragon. At the reference to Lysander the arrogant Greek Taoiseach, I smiled and nodded, feeling just a little proud myself. I suppose he was right about that. Maybe I could fight a fort on my own, if I could focus my powers and do that trick again. I just really hated it, that I couldn't come to school with Alexander himself. It would have been really nice to be reassured by him before I had to enter the building and see either Fort or Jennifer or both. As I got out of the car and walked into the school, I couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something big was going to happen. Something that would change my life, and that of many around me forever. But just as I was about to say something to Sarah, I spotted Alexander on the other side of the parking lot, getting out of his own car. He appeared completely relaxed as he stopped occasionally to chat with a student or another teacher as he made his way into the building. I was caught with the impression that he was saying goodbye to the place and people already, and I realized how much he loved teaching and going to school, seeing the students and enriching their lives. It saddened me when I realized that he could never fully do that, because he was the leader of an entire continent, even if his Taoiseach did most of the work for him usually. Still, he could never stay in one place for more than a few years, because the humans would start to wonder why he didn't age. Sarah gave me a soft push towards the school. Come on, class won't wait for you. I allowed her to lead me into the school and to my first class of the day, with the grizzled old teacher, Mr. Cooks, who was actually a werewolf himself. I knew it was to be expected, but still I shivered every time I realized either the teacher or a student was looking at my mark. It was unsettling to realize how many in each of my classes were not really human. It seemed at least 2 or 3 in each of my classes was a wolf, and as Sarah pointed out, at least one witch attended each class too. There were no other vampires though. But Sarah claimed that was because they in general were loners, and it didn't really work well to hunt the same area for food with many. It made me wonder how all of the men stationed at the Clitton residence got fed. I knew there was at least a dozen vampires, and certainly at least a dozen Weirs too, that were responsible for the protection of us and the building. It wasn't until I made my way over to my 3rd class that day, English with Alexander, that I finally bumped into Jennifer. The beautiful blonde swept her eyes over me and then focused them on my bare neck, straight on the mark. A moment of surprise made her appear younger, and then she lifted her baby blue eyes back to mine and smiled. Yes, she actually smiled, and it was a true one too. Not one of those fake smiles that she usually shared with her besties. It was only then that I noted her appearance, her clothing just a little more drab and less flamboyant than usual. Her dress actually reaching to her knees, although still hugging her curves and her neckline high enough to be called demure. Wow, what had happened to her? "Morning, Brittany," she muttered. But somehow she seemed unable now to meet my eyes, and in a hurry she turned away and sat down in her usual seat at the front of the class. She didn't even look at Alexander as he stood in front of the chalkboard, his sleeves still rolled up so that everyone, even the human population of the class, could see the mark. He didn't look at me as I passed him, but I felt him brush my mind in a gentle caress. Smiling and feeling better about this day and myself even despite my bad feeling when I arrived that day, I sat down beside Sarah, laughing with her when we heard the rumors and speculations fly around the room about Alexander's tattoo. The two words in the back said nothing, both of them girls, as they occasionally glanced at me. Frowns marred their foreheads, and it made me wonder if Fort, as the new alpha of the pack, had told them about his plans for me. It felt weird to be in school again after the past week, but Alexander didn't really seem to bother teaching Sarah or me. Instead, he allowed us to talk quietly, so that Sarah could teach me how to mentally talk with her too. It wasn't hard, but still, I had to focus a lot more compared to talking with Alexander or Andy, or even Clan Extic. The topic Sarah wanted to discuss, however, shocked me to my core: children. And she didn't mean that in the, "aw, they're cute" kind of way. No. She was actually telling me how much she'd like to have kids herself, and that she hoped she'd be able to conceive soon with Danis. Gaping, I asked her out loud, "Come again? I thought you couldn't? I mean, aren't you? Aren't we what? And why wouldn't we?" Sarah asked in return, and I hurriedly tried to switch back to the mental conversation. "I thought being a vampire you couldn't have kids." "You died," I exclaimed. If she was saying that she could get pregnant if they tried, didn't that mean Alexander could actually get me pregnant too? I was very sure we hadn't been using protection, but I'd assumed it hadn't been necessary. I suddenly felt a little sick. Sick enough, in fact, for Alexander to turn his eyes on me and frown in concern. Yeah. Well, you only die for like a few minutes, and seeing as we're still warm and got a heartbeat, we aren't dead. Not even undead. We're very much alive. Didn't Alex explain this to you?" Sarah was saying to me. "Since we have a heartbeat, albeit a very slow one, say about 20 beats per minute, and we all have regenerative powers, it wouldn't make sense, right, to be infertile? It's just a very small chance for it to happen, since we're more or less immortal and the reproduction rate sort of has to balance with that." I heard what she was saying, but I was still staring and trying to come to terms with all the information, my stomach heaving in shock at the possibility that I might actually be pregnant because Alexander had seemed to have forgotten about that tiny little detail. "Are you okay, love?" Sarah said out loud, stretching out a hand to pat my forehead. "You're suddenly a little distracted." I was incredibly grateful that class was finally over at just that moment. Students streamed out of the room in a hurry, eager to get to their lunches, and I jumped out of my chair and stalked over to Alexander, seated behind his desk, to glare at him. I couldn't say anything as long as there were still students in the room, at least not out loud, but I allowed him to feel the full force of my glare. How could he go around hiding key information like that? Behind me, I heard Jennifer suddenly say loudly, "Come on, let's get out of here." Hori. Barely 20 seconds later, the room was empty except for Sarah, Alexander, and me. "What the hell, Alexander? Why didn't you tell me?" I spat out, clenching my fists to keep them from going to my stomach. "I could be pregnant." "I didn't want that. Not right now." A little surprised, Alexander looked at me, one eyebrow raised in question before looking at Sarah over my shoulder. She must have either mouthed the answer to him or telepathically said something, because suddenly his expression cleared. "I'm sorry, Agramo Troyi. It didn't seem important," he said, shrugging his wide shoulders. "Not important? Not important? How can it not be important?" "I thought it wasn't possible," I spluttered indignantly. "It slipped my mind, to be honest," he replied, stepping around the desk so he could grab hold of my shoulders. Behind me, I heard the door close as Sarah left. "It slipped your mind that you should have used protection and that I could possibly be pregnant now? What kind of 1,100-year-old adult are you?" "Protection? Why would we use that?" he asked, confused now. Oh my, did Sarah not fill him in properly? Didn't Sarah tell you it takes ages for couples to conceive? Vampire couples, at least. We aren't all that fertile even though everything works just fine. Wasn't it in that book you read a while back? Would. But the chance was still, there wasn't it. This wasn't reassuring in the least. He pulled on my shoulders until he could hold me against his chest. I swear you are not pregnant, Brittany. And even without protection, you probably won't be for a very, very long time. Maybe even a century or longer. You'd know if I was. I asked him, feeling a little more reassured now. Yes, instantly, he replied. You should have told me about this. It's still my choice if we should be using protection or not. I don't want to be pregnant right now. You are right, Agamokli. Forgive me, but it really did not occur to me that you might feel that way. I will arrange protection as soon as possible. He sounded genuinely remorseful about it, but I also realized something else. Once, long ago, he'd already been a father and he'd lost both his children to famine and disease. Despite the long time that had passed, that must still hurt him deeply somewhere. The chance, that very small chance that one day he might be a father again, gave him peace of mind. You are sure the chance is very slim? Oda, I asked him. He nodded. It takes couples on average 100 years to conceive their first child, and often the second child takes even longer. The older the vampire, the harder it becomes too. You mean that even if we had unsafe sex every day for the next 100 years, I might still not get pregnant? Those were pretty bad odds indeed. No wonder Sarah was ranting about how badly she wanted it and how scared she was that it was going to take forever. I do plan on the sex every day, Alexander replied with a smirk, tilting my head upwards so he could look me in the eye. Really, Britt, there is no need to be worried at all. I can even use my powers to make the chance next to nothing. I shrugged. Maybe? I have to think about this, okay? Only now did I realize how I'd already accepted the fact that I'd never have children myself, thinking that I knew everything. But with this avenue reopened, what did I really want? I did want children one day, but not while Fort and Thornton were out to get me. You can think about it for as long as you want, but you have to leave now or you'll miss lunch. A soft kiss was dropped on my forehead as he pushed me to the door. You're not mad at me? Not sure, I replied, but I smiled at him. But I do love you. Tagura agam duit, he replied. Alexander didn't come to bed with me that night. Instead, he said he had to work to get some things arranged for our departure. That, however, didn't mean he didn't come with me to tuck me into bed and sing me his lullaby till I fell asleep. Nor did it mean that he didn't take the time to make love to me even before that. He really did mean it when he'd said he planned on sex every day. I wasn't really complaining about that either, of course. He held me cradled in his arms while he sang until I fell asleep, but the knowledge that he had to leave as soon as I dozed off didn't help. I just knew I wouldn't be dreaming nice things that night. When I woke up the next morning, Alexander still wasn't there. But as I started to get up, to get dressed, he just came into the room. Already up, agroar mokroy? He asked as he tugged me into the circle of his arms. Forgive me for leaving you alone all night. There's more to arrange than expected. Did you sleep all right? He brushed his hands over my back and then pressed his lips against my temple while I just enjoyed the closeness for a moment. I was right about expecting dreams, I told him honestly as I remembered the night's images. I kept remembering good days with my mom, and then every time the image of her upset and broken after that demon visited spoiled the memory. Alexander didn't say anything as he rubbed circles with his fingers on my scalp with one hand and on my back with the other, enclosing me with warmth and something intrinsically male that I loved very much. It chased away the dreams with an ease I didn't expect. After a quick shower and a hurried breakfast, I made my way to the SUV parked in front of the house, kissing Alexander goodbye just a little worried. That feeling from yesterday, the one spelling out doom, had only increased, and I think everyone was feeling it. Pretty soon, things would come to a conclusion, an ending, and I wasn't sure any of us was going to like the result. Was it going to be an all-out fight against Thornton's forces? Was he going to risk it? So far, all we'd received from him was that warning through Deidre and the abduction of Mattis, the missing guard, and the death of Chamali. Alexander had let slip that this was all rather mild considering the stakes so far. The fact that Mattis's body hadn't turned up yet in some gruesome way meant he was most likely still alive and possibly being tortured just because they could. I knew that made Alexander sad, even though he tried to hide it. All his time as a Regis hadn't hardened his heart and shielded him from the cruelty of his world. I knew that and admired his strength as he survived and ruled his life and this country. There was a witch driving us to school today, and I wondered where Jaden was for a moment. I didn't mind if he wasn't there, but it surprised me that Alexander would trust a witch who clearly wasn't a zowie seach with my life. The witch was called Gareth, and he'd been the one to find Shamali's head. I remembered seeing him. He was kind, but very lean and sinewy, his frame a little too skinny to be called attractive, but it radiated power nonetheless. I had the feeling that the magic that ran through his blood and gave him his skills and talents, spells, was causing him to look so skinny. It didn't sit right with me. Sarah wasn't there yet, and neither was Bob, but the car pulled away from the house and drove me to school anyway. "Aren't Bob and Sarah coming?" I asked as soon as Gareth set the car in motion. He shook his head. "Sarah will let Dennis teleport her to school. They had something to do." A wry smile sent my way through the rearview mirror. Bob was withheld too by a certain redhead, I believe. His expression told me what he thought of that, contempt and a little disgust. He clearly disliked Deidre, and I felt instantly sorry for the girl. Nobody around here seemed to like her, all of them judging her by the little they knew. Still, if she'd managed to make Bob decide to stay home today, did that mean they'd made progress? That they were actually starting to try and breach the gap between them? I was already so very used to living with the Clittons and speaking with people telepathically that my cell phone ringing startled me. The caller ID was unfamiliar, so I picked it up with a little caution. "Hello?" I kept my voice down and leaned back so that Gareth, my driver and guard, couldn't hear what I said automatically. "Brittany, I'm glad I finally reached you." Stephanie's voice greeted me. For once, she sounded surprisingly nice, a genuine kind of nice that didn't sweet her one bit. It immediately set off the alarm bells in my head. "What do you want?" I snapped. Anger towards her for all that she'd done to me resurfaced and made me sound acidic. I didn't bother to hide it. She deserved what she got, every bit of it. "Tut-tut. Not so snappy, dear. I called to do you a favor here," the woman said, her tone of voice condescending now. The belittling words did nothing to ease my anger. Instead, it only flared hotter and came closer to the surface, breaking whatever tranquility I had. "What do you want?" I repeated my question, my voice if possible containing more venom than before. "I found some old things in a few boxes. I believe they might be from your mother," I thought. "Maybe you'd be interested to have them?" Stephanie said, her voice sounding kind and nice again. It gave me shivers even as my heart stuttered for a moment at the possibility that there might be more things of my mother left. Especially so close on the heels of the dreams I'd had last night. It was like salt on already festering wounds. "Why would you want to do that? You've never given me the time of day. You hate me," I told the woman. I knew without a doubt that she was somehow trying to lure me to her, to get me to see her, and when I did, she'd probably try to sell me to some vampire again, like she'd done with the Millers, with that Luke. I wasn't sure what she knew about all of this. If she actually knew about Alexander being a vampire, or about vampires in general, but her looks and her behavior that night I left seemed to indicate that she had some knowledge, at least. "Can I do something nice for you once in a while?" Stephanie said, her voice completely innocent. She was a damn good actress when she wanted to be. "Would you cut the crap?" "What do you really want?" I told her. A silence on the line for a moment, and I contemplated just hanging up and forgetting about the whole thing. Something stopped me, though. "All right, I'll tell you what I want, girl, and I'll tell you how it's going to happen." All the nice, sugar-coated tones had disappeared as she spoke now. Brusque and businesslike, she sounded nothing like her usual self, at least nothing like how she sounded when talking to a man. "If you want to see that guard alive and well, you come with me after school without a peep. I'll be there with my car to pick you up. As soon as you get in, I'll make sure that guy gets his freedom back. Got it?" And not a single word to Alexander or any of his cronies. I swallowed. My life for that of a guard I didn't know? My life and that of Alexander. That's what she was asking. It was utterly bewildering to hear her talk about Alexander and the good men that served him that way. She really did know about the entire supernatural world. I'd have never guessed. "What will you do with me if I come with you?" I ventured to ask, hoping that she'd give me a straight answer. "Ooh, nothing too bad, dear. You'll only be a bargaining chip for a short while. As soon as Alexander surrenders some of his territory, or as soon as he offers me a better deal than Thornton does, you're free to go." My word on it. I found that hard to believe. But on the other hand, if she was looking for either a good deal with Alexander or to fulfill the one she had with Thornton, there was no reason to harm me otherwise, was there? And despite everything she'd done, Stephanie wasn't the type to get her own hands dirty and slap me about just for fun. Unless you pissed her off, you have all day to decide what to do, but if you speak a word to anyone about this, you can be sure that your guard will be dead. I'll make sure it won't be a pleasant death either. A silence as she let her words sink in before she added, "You better be there at the end of the day, Brittany." Immediately after the call disconnected, right on time for me to look up and see that we'd just rolled into the school's parking lot. Gareth the witch that drove me to school waved once but didn't ask who had called me and didn't even look like he'd noticed a thing. As I climbed out of the car and hurried into school, I shivered again. See? That feeling of impending doom had been right. That call boded nothing but bad things. A little shocked and dazed, I wandered through the rest of my school day as I contemplated on what to do. It caused Alexander to frown when he saw me in class and check up on me and my mental state several times during the day. Thanks to Sarah's lessons, however, he was unable to glean from my mind what had happened in the car. The disturbing phone call went completely unnoticed, it seemed. Instead, I reassured him that it was only because it was sinking in how rapidly my life was changing. Even Sarah seemed to buy that when she popped into her seat that morning just before the bell rang to signal the start of first period. As we talked throughout the day, she appeared not the suspect, a single thing. We talked unhindered by teachers and students with our mental contact. It was quite cool if I hadn't been too occupied to appreciate it. I wanted to ask her or Alexander if it was possible to track my thoughts. If it was true that Stephanie would know as soon as I told either one of them about the call. But I was scared to ask even that for fear of her finding that out. I did not want to kill poor man by making a stupid move. Fort wasn't in school and neither were a lot of the other wolves. But Alexander was convinced it was because of the extra security around the school he brought in. Plus the fact that the alpha position had changed from Thomas to his son Fort. It wasn't unheard of that after such a thing, the wolves spend some time together to reinforce bonds. Even the grizzled Mr. Cooks was missing, according to Sarah. He was a low-ranking wolf though, and he now had to listen to anything Fort said. I felt sorry for the man because he seemed really nice and kind despite his rugged appearance. Jennifer was still acting out of the ordinary too, wearing a surprisingly small amount of makeup, slightly more demure dress, and hardly paying attention to the male populace in school. In fact, she appeared lost in thought, a frown of confusion almost a permanent fixture on her face. I wondered if she knew about what her mother was trying to do. Was Jennifer also part of this plan? Did she too work for Thornton? Was she even now spying on me to make sure I didn't tell anyone about the call? It was tearing me up inside not to know. But she was rude as usual to the girls she hung out with. At least that hadn't changed. When school was over, Alexander telepathically told me it was safe to make my way outside on my own. There, a vamp I didn't know would pick me and Sarah up and drive us home. Outside, I spotted the SUV turning into the parking lot just as I stepped out the door. But as I started across the tarmac, I noticed the dark green Porsche Stephanie drove. Remembering her phone call, I stared for a moment. Saving the guard taken and getting back more of my mother's things. At least if that part of her story had been true, it was without a doubt a trap. It had to be. Else she wouldn't insist that I come alone and not tell anyone, would she? Of course she'd openly admitted that I'd be a bargaining chip as soon as she had me, but would she be using me against Alexander? Or would she really try to scam Thornton too and try and make a deal with my mate? I'd be crazy if I went with her. I didn't doubt that Stephanie didn't have the resources on her own to hold of the Regis of North America. But Thornton might, and if she was working for him, Chamali's memory flashed through my head. Could I allow another to die for my safety? I bit my lip and started towards the SUV, knowing that it was what I was supposed to do. What everyone would want me to do, and certainly what Alexander would order me to do if he knew. He'd of course try to save Maddie's. But if he had to choose between me or the guard there, really wouldn't be a choice to him. He'd save me, no question about it, and he probably wouldn't even lose sleep over it either. He was right too. If Alexander died, and he would if I did, the entire world as we knew it now. At least America would change. People I loved and cared for would die trying to fight to make things right. Like Jaden and Samuel and even grumpy, horribly arrogant Lysander. A ways behind me, The door opened and Sarah stepped outside, confidently walking over to the same car I was headed for. She didn't appear to have seen me, though. In a split second, my body jerked to a halt and I ducked behind another car. Shocked by my actions, I tried to get up again and make my way to the SUV and Sarah. Yet my muscles wouldn't obey, locked into a crouch to hide myself from safety. What was happening? In panic, I tried to open my mouth to scream, simultaneously opening up my mind to scream for help. Sarah would surely hear me, and so would Alexander. Yet instead, I felt intense pressure on my head, hard enough to make my vision swim. Just hold, I thought. If I don't show up in the next minute at the SUV, they'll look for me. Yet whoever it was that was controlling my body and crushing my head seemed to know this too. I was still clawing at my muscles and the constricting pressure on my mind when my body jerked into action again. I was running, ducked low behind the other cars towards that green Porsche waiting for me. One door was already open and I was thrown into it, roughly. The moment I was inside, I felt control return to my body. I could move my own shaking hands again. Lifting my head, I came face to face with Stephanie. "Hello, Brittany. I'm glad you decided to join us," Stephanie said gleefully from behind the steering wheel as she pulled away from the curb. "Very glad," added Fort with a smirk from the back seat, resting his elbows on the chairs in front of him so he could lean his face in close to me, sniffing at my hair. The car was already speeding away, and the doors locked, but still, I grabbed the door handle and tried to open it. "Let me out." "Where's that guard?" "Where's Mattis?" "Let us go." "Not so fast, dear. First you have to meet someone else. After that, you're free to go." Stephanie patted my leg as if to comfort me, driving down the familiar road to the big house. "Remember our deal, Siren?" Fort barked at her and I shivered. Oh no, Stephanie never intended to deal with Alexander, and she never intended to let me go. She'd already promised me to Fort. This was bad. Very bad. I tried again, with as much force as I could muster to shout out mentally towards Alexander or Sarah, anyone. Yet sharp pain made my head hurt like nothing I'd ever felt before, that pressure constricting around my head. Not even a beep made it out. "Of course I do. She's free to go with you and birth happy little cubs in a dozen as soon as this is over. I won't forget if you do your job right," Stephanie hissed back at him, her scarlet red nails now tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. There wouldn't be much time to get me to the house and hide me, I assumed. By now already they knew I'd gone missing, and they'd start looking. But Stephanie abducting me wasn't on the list of things expected. Of that I was sure. Until her call this morning, I hadn't known she'd been involved in any of this. Why did I stupidly hide that knowledge from my friends and mate? Idiot. Fort smirked as he ran a hand over the exposed skin of my throat and shoulder, right across my mark. "It's all in vain, my sweet, soon you'll be free of him, and we'll spend eternity together." I shivered and tried to suppress the disgust I felt, but he noticed and his eyes darkened in anger. He'd so lost it. If he thought I wanted to be with him, if he thought Alexander was doing this against my will, because that sure as hell was what his words insinuated, yet I could only assume now that it was Fort that was blocking my mind from contacting anything. Since when could he do this? Had he been hiding the skill? And was it him or Stephanie that had controlled my body like a puppet and got me into this car? The house appeared all too soon, and I prepared to make a run for it as soon as the doors would open. My hands straying towards the belt of thin knives around my waist, I had to summon up some anger, which wouldn't be hard, and maybe then I could stab Fort and trap him between forms. I was pretty sure that was my only chance, because despite everything, I knew I couldn't stab Stephanie. I didn't know if she had fast healing abilities or not. Sirens were unfamiliar territory for me, and it appeared that's what she was. At least Fort had called her one. But Stephanie drove the car straight into the garage, and when they at last opened the door to let me out, it wasn't just Fort and Stephanie. There was 2 wolves, already shifted, and 2 more burly guys that must be wolves too, each in their mid-20s. That wasn't all. With them stood a slightly stooped, red scaly creature. It appeared humanoid except that it wore no clothing and had no distinct external marks that declared it male or female. It also had a row of black horns on its head and bony ridges along its back. It was hissing menacingly, and it confirmed a cliché. It stank of sulfur. Clearly it was some sort demon, one that couldn't mingle very well among humankind. "Now, don't even think about trying anything," Stephanie said with a smirk as she dragged me with her out of the garage and through the kitchen. I never thought I'd think this, but I'd almost hoped Mr. Baker was home or would come home, the man I'd thought to be my father. I was sure that he knew nothing of all of this and that he'd be shocked and call the police or something. Maybe even call Alexander. No such luck, though. We encountered no one, and soon I was pulled down a small stairs on the other side of the house and into a basement. The place completely bare except for a mattress that looked very disgusting and smelled horrible. The walls concrete. No windows anywhere. "Stay," Stephanie said as she let me go in the middle of the room, as if I had anywhere to run to. The wolves and the demon-like creatures surrounded me as Fort stepped forward and ran his hands down my shoulders and over my back. "What are you doing? Don't touch me." I snapped immediately and I tried to push him away. "Now don't be like that. I'm doing this for your own good," he said, slapping me across the cheek hard enough for the sound to bounce and echo against the walls. He resumed running his hands over my body and TS-keyed when he found the belt with knives. I knew at that point that fighting to keep the knives or do him harm with them was pointless. I couldn't take them all on, so all I could do was try to minimize the damage to myself and hope for Alexander to get here soon. Fort didn't stop when he'd removed the daggers, taking perverse pleasure in checking for more weapons on my person. When he seemed satisfied I had none left, he nodded. "Good girl, now I know it's no star place, but I promise you, soon you'll be getting only the best. But only if you stay put and behave. Got it?" He met my eyes, and his reflected that crazed look I'd seen before. There wasn't even the feeling of a wolf trapped inside a man any longer. Animals weren't crazy and delusional like this. This was his human side that had completely lost it. I remembered that Jaden said Weirs would never tolerate an insane leader. They only followed an alpha they knew was stronger and smarter than they were. An alpha that would keep them safe and fed, protected. Clearly, though, these wolves followed Fort even though he was completely nuts. Why and how did that come to be? I was sure Jaden was right. Crazy to animals meant a kind of sick, and no animal would tolerate a sick leader now, would they? It seemed that with my silence, they thought I'd given them my consent, because they all started backing out of the small, cramped basement room. "Behave, Brittany. It will be over soon." Those were Stephanie's last words before the door slammed shut with a loud bang. I heard several bars slide into place, and when a few minutes later, I tentatively tried how well locked the door was, I knew it was hopeless. My only chance to get out myself was if they opened that door and I somehow could make a run for it. It helped, at least, that I knew the layout of the house, even though I'd never actually been down here. I closed my eyes and summoned up my strongest shields. They weren't much yet, but I tried to remember everything Sarah had told me about it. I really hated how I'd only had time to practice with her twice. I wasn't sure if I could bypass the block of sorts Fort had put on me to keep me from contacting Alexander. Maybe it was gone now that he'd left the room, but I seriously doubted that. He was crazy, but he wasn't entirely stupid now, was he? Besides, he appeared to be under orders from Stephanie, and she was in league with Thornton. One slight push outside my mind and the pressure on my head returned again. No, still there all right? When I was satisfied I'd done the best I could in summoning up those shields, I slammed them up around my mind as tightly as possible. Then, as Sarah had explained to me vaguely once I did a patrols around the outside of those walls to see if there were any places where someone or something was touching my mind. I couldn't see or find anything on the first sweep, nor on the second or third, but I knew there had to be something there. If not Fort, then at least the line that connected me to Alexander, or maybe even the line that connected me to my grandfather. On the fifth round, I stumbled on a kind of vibration. It halted me, and as I examined it, I realized something had been cleverly covering a string of energy that ran from me and away to someone else. Reaching out a mental hand towards it, I imagined a brush to wipe the covers away. It was a line of fire, and I instantly knew that it led to Alexander. Immediately, I heaved a sigh in relief. Thank goodness! At least Fort hadn't somehow found a way to cut my bond with him completely, but my relief soon turned into dismay, because no matter how hard I pulled or tugged or reached and scratched, I just couldn't seem to touch the fire that I knew could never harm me. Something or someone was encasing it in pure, transparent glass as strong as the strongest metal barrier. Was that what was keeping me from contacting Alexander? At least this way, I didn't feel the pain or pressure when I tried to reach out mentally. It made me realize how crude my attempts at telepathy had been before. Now that I knew what to look for, I found 3 more places that gave off a vibration. The first I uncovered was a line of silver, very faint and barely connected to me. It sung and danced with a vibrancy that I knew belonged to Sarah. It was even more impossible to get a grip on that line, and I gave up soon. Then I found a thin line completely on the other side of my mind, as far as one could talk about sides really. It was familiar, and although there were no distinct colors or other characteristics, I knew immediately that it was Andy. This thread that connected to me was much smaller, but also much more strongly connected to me than Sarah's line had been. I wondered if Alexander was connected to Bob and Sarah in the same way. Clearly, blood ties made the telepathy much easier. I felt a slight reluctance to try and reach Andy, not wanting to involve him, but I knew that reaching anyone was important. I had to get a message to Alexander to tell him where I was, if he didn't know yet at least. Maybe he could use that line that connected us to trace me? Or was Fort covering it completely? And was Alexander unable to sense anything from me? Andy's line seemed more touchable when I first reached for it, but it slid through my mental fingers like water. The shield around it more flexible, that left me only one option. I had to find the line that connected me to Telenextic. Fort might not know of it, because, although we hadn't been secretive about it, it wasn't exactly common knowledge. He could only know if Thornton had told him about it, but I had the feeling that hadn't happened. Thornton didn't seem to be the sharing type. Taking hold of my angel wing pendant, I focused on Telenextic, thinking hard on how he felt like, what and who he was as I walked the perimeter of my mind yet again. A line of white light came alive in front of me almost immediately, and in relief I started following it, happy that finally I'd found something that wasn't untouchable or slipped away from me. "Aya?" I called out tentatively when it seemed like the line of light went on forever. "Aya? I need help. I'm trapped and I can't reach Alexander. Someone is blocking me. Please tell him where I am. I'm at the old house. Aya?" There was no reply, and it gave me such a desolate feeling that tears suddenly started spilling from my eyes and the sob burned its way up my throat. "Aya, please," I mumbled out loud and mentally. Only a soft dripping noise and a snicker from a guard outside the door met my ears. "Where is she?" I growled out at the vampire in front of me. He was one of Saraton's men and a damn good spy, and because of that, I'd allowed him to drive Brittany home from school. I'd have felt much better if it had been Jaden or Saraton himself, but they were both busy trying to locate Mattis. The man bent his head and brushed his knuckles against his forehead. "Forgive me, my lord. I arrived just as you sent her out. They must have taken her right from the parking lot in school." None of the guards had seen her leave the building or leave with anyone. But then they'd all been watching for threats from outside of the school. No one had been paying attention to my mate. I cursed out loud in my native language. It was my own fault for thinking it was safe enough to let her walk out alone. With all the threats directed at her and Bob, I should have been watching her like a hawk. In fact, I shouldn't have allowed her to come back to school for this last week. I'd been selfish in wanting to keep her close when I did feel obligated to go and say goodbye to the students, so it was all my fault that she'd been taken now. Saraton stood behind the vampire and nodded. "We're doing the best we can, my lord. All my men located in this area are making sweeps and trying to track her by scent. I've even got the crone working on it with a detection spell. It was good of you to work with her to reinforce the witch community in this town. You are absolutely sure you cannot contact her mentally?" Jaden asked carefully. He absently patted the vampire on his back as he sent him out of the room, his way of reassuring the man that he wasn't going to be punished. "Of course I am," I gritted out. Yet I still scrambled around in my mind trying to find hers and the connection between us. There was absolutely nothing though, and that was very frightening. Our bond had gotten exponentially stronger since the marking, but now there was nothing. Sarah behind me piped up, "Of course he can't. They are blocking us from tracing her in any way. That's why I'm sure not even Danis's grandma can find her. I've tried several times as well, but I keep coming up blank." I knew she was right and I'd known that was the case from the start, but it was still a relief that the absence of the bond didn't mean she was dead. Or that they'd somehow completely severed it. Samuel strode into the room with a grim look on his face. "Everyone close by has arrived, and Danis is working on teleporting the most skilled fighters we can relocate here. We can strike at full force in less than half an hour." The Viking pulled his blade from his scabbard and nodded at us as he swung it around a few times, as if flexing, preparing himself for battle. "If you wish to pull out even more men, we can do so and be ready in an hour. I have a feeling Thornton has found an unlikely ally." "Stephanie," I nodded. "Brittany must be back at the Baker house where that siren pulls the strings. I knew I should have left her for dead with those vampires before." It was the only logical explanation. Stephanie knew about me, and Brittany and sirens were notorious for their ambition and manipulation. They needed to sleep with a different partner regularly or they'd die. It was their form of food, if you will. A different kind of vampire because they sucked out a man's energy during coitus. This Stephanie was a very ambitious one indeed, and she had a daughter that she could use to do all her dirty work. Jennifer must have somehow tricked Brittany into coming with her, or maybe she'd managed to drag her out of school. I'd assumed the girl was harmless, since she'd toned down her powers in school and dressed properly now. She'd even stuttered out a vague apology to me after class today, declaring that she had seen the light and didn't want to come between Brittany and me. It must have been some sort of a diversion, and it had worked too. But bloody hell, she'd appeared so sincere. And since the mating with Brittany, I'd been so much more sensitive to the moods and feelings of other people. "Seriton, have your men scope out the place. We need to move as soon as possible." I hadn't even finished my sentence before the dark man fluidly started moving. He was out the door the second I finished, with a determined look on his face. Another realization dawned on me. I want to bet that Bloody Wolf is involved too. "Jaden, send someone to account for all the wares in the area." Jaden nodded and all but ran out the door, only to return a minute later with a nod, signaling me that he'd done as I said. I couldn't stand still as I anxiously paced across the room, my fingers brushing over my own set of swords on the desk. I'd teleported them to me as soon as I heard the news that Brittany had gone missing. My hands itched to face the enemy, to carve a path through everyone responsible for this. My unnatural heart was beating furiously now, pumping borrowed blood through my system at a much faster pace than usual. It made it even harder for me to control my anger, to keep my mind focused on the best way to find Brittany and get her back in one piece, unharmed. "It's not unlikely that Stephanie or Thornton will try to contact you soon." "Alex?" Lysander spoke up for the first time from his place beside the door. The dragon had been completely still as a statue, with smoldering black eyes and clenched fists. It was why I knew I could trust him, why I knew he was a good person underneath all the swagger and bluster, the arrogant words and the disdain towards humans in general. It was all an act. Even he didn't see through himself. Right now the boy was so furious that he had trouble containing his own anger. Only the thick layers of self-control imposed on him by himself and his family were keeping him in check now. "They just did," Sarah said as she nodded towards the door. At that moment, it opened to admit another of my Tawisachdil Sakta, a woman by the name of Anaya. Message came through. "They got her. Alex and Thornton demands you resign your position as Regis and hand the territory over to his son." I growled in frustration. He's never gonna let me live. This is bullshit. Any confirmation on where he is right now and how many fighters he's got with him? It was useless to do, but still. I reached out again mentally for Brittany, hoping in vain that I'd manage to get through to her somehow. I was rewarded by a dull aching at the back of my head. That definitely meant someone was blocking our bond. Whoever it was damn powerful too. "Seriton will report back to you any minute now, Alex," Jaden spoke, reaching out to clasp my shoulder tightly and squeeze hard enough for a human to bruise. But my gut tells "You're right, and she's there. From what we know, Thornton can't have that many with him." I knew that,